Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Reviewing Adam Curtis. It is the 219th edition of The Deepest Law since the start of this august show. And my fellow sensible centrist, Simon Roberts, how are you doing?
Good afternoon, AA. Good afternoon, chat. I'm very well. It's another glorious day in the kingdom of the paedophile banking elites.
Before we get going, you're an Inf J. I'm an Int J.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have a look on that site, you know, who are all the Int Js?
Yeah.
And it's literally just like, you know, any banging person ever in history is an Int J. And then who's an Inf J? It's like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa.
Yeah. That's true. Normally, I summarize it as you know, Hitler, Gandhi, and Shirley Temple.
Oh, well, Hitler was an Inf J, was he?
Yeah, well, allegedly. I mean, there's obviously, you know, there's going to be contestation, but yeah, it's usually thought of as an INFJ. And Carrie Fisher was one, apparently.
I see.
There you go.
That was probably his weakness, really, wasn't it? It was his feeling. too many feelings.
It was his introversion.
I really love dogs and things like this. A wet blanket. Oh, only joking, obviously. How are you doing, Panama Hat?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's very nice to be back for a second week. I would just like to push back against this bug-brained psychological classification. I reject all these types of tests and you know, are you an Int 7 or a 12-1 or whatever this is? I think it's just astrology for men.
People in the chat go off and feed in Panama's public pronouncements and videos and tweets into a Myers-Briggs type indicator.
No, I won't have it.
He's got to be an I. He's got to be an I type. He's got to be in the I family.
Human personality and intelligence cannot be compressed into a few stupid code words.
Okay, well, let me ask you a few questions then, Panama.
I'm not going to engage in this.
When you've been out socializing, do you need time alone to recharge, or do you feel energized by the socializing?
Depends entirely on who I've been socializing with.
All right, okay.
The conditional deflection.
It's true though, isn't it? Anyone. Surely that's true for everyone.
No, it's not true for me. I even need time to recharge after spending time with my own family, or like, you know.
Well, to be fair, I do need time after seeing my family. I agree with that.
When I saw you guys down in London a while back, for example, I needed like a day to recover. Even though I kind of enjoyed our time of, you know, chatting about Stalin and things like that. But you know,
we could register your quiet, submerged exhaustion all throughout.
Was Stalin in it, Jay? I wonder what Stalin's.
I think it feels like he's too extroverted. He likes getting out and about.
It does say in Molotov Remembers that when they had a bit of a drink, I mean, often he wouldn't drink. He'd make sure everybody else was lathered up and he'd stay sober. When he did have the occasional vodka, he'd bring out the Georgian folk songs and have a bit of a kind of a
knees up,
you know, a jolly sing song. Which I would never do. So, you know.
Did you Panama? Did you saw the Armando Iannucci film, The Death of Stalin, and the characterization of Stalin in that as a kind of sort of, you know, grouchy, gravelly kind of, you know, old London geezer. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, because he's only in it for, you know, less than a few seconds before he actually dies. But it's hard to say, really. I mean, the most I know about Stalin's personal attitudes comes from that Sebag Montefiore book, Court of the Red Tsar, which is very good, but of course the author does belong to a certain stripe of which Stalin was not fond. So we should probably point that out. But he was quite he was very changeable depending on his mood. You know, he could be very chatty and kind of uplifted, especially when he'd had a bit of wine. And you know, he was quite he liked intellectual discussion. He was very well read. He had a big library that he used to annotate all the books in and this kind of thing. But when he was irritated or in a bad mood, you really knew it. So I would suggest that the characterization of him in that is pretty on point, because I
relate so much to that. Relates to literally me. I know.
You see him enjoying the jokes that Khrushchev tells at the beginning, and then of course when the guard arrives with his recording of the concert, you know, he snaps at him in the kind of Cockney accent they portray him with there. I mean, I'd say it's pretty accurate. But apparently, according to, I think it was Molotov, they used to say that you could tell how he was feeling by his pipe, because if he was in a really bad mood, he'd be blowing air through that pipe, and you'd see this volcanic eruption of fire,
amazing,
ready to really scream at someone. Whereas if it was kind of calm, cool, collected puffs, you knew you were all right. You know, just.
I wonder what made the pipe blaze more, the left deviation or the right deviation.
Well, it depended, I suppose.
Yeah. I just wondered about the class coding of him, as you say. You know, he's kind of got this, you know, in the way that they talk about the Moustache Man. You know, he had the noticeable Bavarian accent. You know, which almost seems to be suggesting, you know, he's a bit below the salt kind of thing. You know, and Stalin in the film is kind of, you know, he's surrounded by kind of wobbly-lipped wets.
Yes, and I think there is some truth to that, in that he was very blunt. And I correct me if I may be wrong, but I remember reading somewhere that he was never actually that comfortable in Russian. That because he didn't learn Russian until fairly late on, I believe. And he was always it always felt like more of a second language. So I think, as with the Moustache Man, you know, he was very marked out by his accent and outsider status. You know, which I suppose is just another interesting example of minority rule, really, being a Georgian ruling over Russia.
Very interesting. Now, speaking of minority rule, I do want to test drive a little thing with you guys that occurred to me when I was considering making a video on this, but can't be bothered, to be honest. I do want to. It's something I've wondered about it, because when you read enough of the Epstein files, it becomes quickly apparent that
you're going a bit muffly, AA.
You sound like you're underwater. We're not getting much of this, I'm afraid.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Oh, that's better. That's better.
Oh, something had gone in my mic, maybe. But if you read enough of the Epstein files, it becomes quickly apparent that he had a very particular worldview. And many of his talking points that I would say have been, shall we say, seeded within the online right? Because, you know, there's this kind of rather large effort now to try to, you know, apologize for, or, you know, play down or glaze Epstein in some sort of way. You know, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff has come out about, like, what's that thing, 4chan, poll on 4chan, possibly bits of Reddit, but basically that Epstein was very interested in what you might say race and IQ, human biodiversity, and, you know, many of his attitudes, you might say, are attitudes that I've seen, you know, attitudes that we've been introduced to, you know, in exploring right-wing ideas over the past few years. And, you know, it cannot be out of the question that many of those were, you know, if not directly by him, seeded by people that he is connected with, in a bid to try to normalize a certain way of thinking, you know, his racial supremacism, his you might say Nietzschean morality, his master-slave morality, the tribalism they talked about pretty openly, him and Peter Thiel talking about tribalism as a way to combat globalism and things like this. And I have to wonder, because, you know, I wrote that article a few years ago saying the online right is entirely fake. Well, what if so much of it was priming for this moment, for the moment that it all comes out, so that it's like, oh, you look at these talking points and people actually conclude, oh, I believe all those things as well. You know what I mean? I find that I don't think it's that conspiratorial out there, given that this is a very strong theme in the Epstein files, which I have to say I didn't really see coming. I knew that he was a pervert, and I knew that he was involved in finance and so on. I don't think I knew before the Epstein files came out that he had these kind of, might say, these viewpoints. And I can think of certain networks. I can think of certain types of quote unquote influencer who have basically been pushing these talking points for the past decade. And I really wonder about that as was a lot of it an op? Any thoughts?
I think one of the interesting things about Epstein is, of course, that as you basically say, it's revealed that he was in no way what you'd call a liberal. I mean, as you say, very kind of tribalistic thinking, very, very interested in IQ, as you say, master slave. The really interesting thing is that, he does seem to have actually been very influential in kind of creating what we now see as basic kind of right-wing discourse, especially on the internet. I believe he actually, as was revealed in the files, had a hand in setting up the original /poll board on 4chan, because he knew Moot, which is the username of the man that founded the website. And very interestingly, in 2011, Moot tried to take Poll off the internet because it was getting so extreme and so kind of uncontrollable. And Epstein went and had it set back up. He went and sort of had a quick meeting with him and said, no, you got to get this back up there. So I suppose what we'd have to work out is, was this really like a very long play to influence kind of discussion and narratives in the West? Or was Epstein, just really interested in, basically being a shit poster? Which, I mean, it could be either or both could be true. I'm leaning on the second option there, that basically both are true.
Think of, though, the way that poll worked. It was 100% anonymous. You don't know who's there. There's no vetting. You don't know how many people there are bots or agents. And so many memes and so many kind of, I guess you could say, mind poisons, rumors, etc., started on poll. Right? They were seeded in there from poll, but you don't know who that was because they were all anons. And it's basically a perfect mechanism, right? Because a bunch of anons is literally the perfect disorganized mass. So if there's an organized element within the disorganized mass, it's actually quite a good way to game and infiltrate, the quote unquote internet. So I do find it very very interesting as a kind of exercise or experiment in in a kind of new way of mind control, if you want to put it that way. Possibly. I mean, and then the other very troubling thing, I think, is that if you find yourself with a 95% crossover rate with the views of Jeffrey Epstein, what's it saying? Does that say that basically the end point of your worldview is one that leads to this sort of depravity that we've been reading about, this sort of abject disdain for human life and human suffering, and treating other people like animals? Basically, is that where it all ends up? There's a genuine question. I think I mean, me as a sensible centre leftist, I don't really have to care about this, but people who still identify as part of the quote-unquote online right, I would say I would have to do some soul searching and ask themselves serious questions about, is this where your worldview actually leads? Does it inevitably end up in something like this? How can it not? This is a genuine question. So...
Interested in the intersection of Epstein and people like Chomsky, and as Morgoth has mentioned, Richard Dawkins.
That's also interesting, yeah.
suggestions that he was genuinely interested in the kind of intellectual conversation with these people. I understand with Chomsky, from looking at emails, he was, I think Chomsky said he wasn't receiving any financial inducements directly from Epstein, but essentially Epstein was advising them on the management of a family fund, a family trust.
Right.
And there's extensive emails with Chomsky, because they wanted to change the principal trustee for Chomsky's income. And then Epstein was obviously sort of giving advice, and there were lots of these, come round to Jeffries for a burger kind of, and, we'll put you up in a hotel and stuff. So he received in kind.
Why couldn't Noam Chomsky just use a normal accountant like any other?
Yeah.
This is it.
Yes. Yeah, it was all tax minimization stuff. It seems it was two parts of Chomsky's income. He only got about 60K a year from his kind of whatever academic position he had. But then he got another 360K a year from, I presume, some sort of private funding. I don't know if that's a sort of standard arrangement for academics in the US. Perhaps they have a kind of nominal salary, and then they make a lot of money elsewhere. But they were trying to manage the amount for tax minimization purposes.
That's quite a lot of right deviation from old Chomsky,
yes.
Isn't it? Not very comradely behavior.
Yeah.
But
having his wealth managed.
Yeah. Interesting to know what who else was he talking to? Who else was coming to? I mean, obviously Marvin Minsky was mentioned. He was a AI guy, wasn't he? And I see Lawrence Krauss was in there as well. Sort of touching on some of the intellectual dark web people, perhaps.
I mean, that's been another aspect of it. Of just how fake many of the, I've spent years now saying the political kayfabe, these divisions of left versus right aren't really real as they're presented. And I mean, you have sometimes in the same email chain, rightists and leftists and Jeffrey Epstein happily colluding, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all going off to dinner with Woody Allen later, which is funny. Woody Allen's Epstein's sending out 23andMe kits for Woody Allen
Just
to find out what his DNA says.
As if you'd need a test to find out what Woody Allen is.
Very, very, very interesting.
With some out of curiosity, you mentioned Woody Allen. There's two people who I wonder if were in there. I haven't had time to go through any of it myself, but Roman Polanski and Bernie Sanders, have those names come up at all? Do you know?
That's an interesting question. Should we have a look?
Should we see if Bernie Sanders? Yeah, because I mean, if Woody Allen is in there, there's no reason why maybe Polanski wouldn't be unless they've got some kind of block on him.
Let's see if I can pull up the Epstein files live on air.
Live checking.
Live check. Okay. I've noticed though that it's quite inconsistent. Like you'll search the same name once, nothing will come up, and then you'll do it again, and loads of stuff will come up. So I haven't quite worked out.
I mean, depending on how big the set of documents is, it could be that whichever computer you have is sort of having to do it in chunks. If there's that many.
Okay. There's quite a lot of mention of Bernie.
Okay.
Sadly, it turns out Bernie is not the liberal messiah after all. Sanders is very principled, though flawed. Shame on you, Bernie, for becoming their tool. I say this knowing of many of my friends who are Bernie supporters will be angered. Yeah, there's quite a lot of mention of Bernie, it seems, in the files. Although I don't know if he's directly... Have a look. Bernie Sanders.
Saying the other funny thing, I don't know if you saw Panama, was the video with Steve Bannon, where we could sort of hear Epstein's voice for the first time. And
yeah,
interesting the number of people who's commenting, saying he sounds like Woody Allen. Basically he's a Brooklynite.
He does have a very strong twang, doesn't he?
Yeah.
In his accent. Yeah, admittedly, he didn't sound like what I imagined he would sound like.
Yeah, sort of deep and sophisticated,
Yeah. Well, I mean, also I've noticed I can't get out of my head how much him and Anthony Bourdain resemble each other. The late Anthony Bourdain.
I mean, there are emails between Larry Summers, who was in the U.S. Treasury, let's not forget, and Jeffrey Epstein. Jamaica very good, kids great, though tired of some of their admiration for Bernie Sanders. How are you? Says Larry Summers. She will contact you directly. How's South Jamaica? So, I mean, there are some of these that are kind of like, could be like your boomer con uncle or something. But they're incidental mentions of Bernie. Not direct contact. Who was the other person you wanted? Polanski.
Yeah, Roman Polanski.
Nothing's coming up for him. Although that doesn't mean he's not in there, because it's quite wonky.
Yeah.
I find that repeated searches. Like
you never know. There can be nicknames used or
something. Yeah. There's some weird thing. Let me try again. Hold on. Epstein. I'm gonna have to go in again. I find that if you try to do a second search, nothing comes up. It's probably because there are so many people on there.
Probably. But also, Roman Polanski has sort of kept his head under the radar a bit. He just kind of stays in France and makes films, doesn't he? So he's not because isn't he can't go to America, can he? He can't set foot on US soil.
Nor France, I don't think. Is it?
Doesn't he live in France? Isn't that where he went? Polanski after the conviction.
Switzerland, France, something like that.
Yeah, but he can't go to America because they'll arrest him.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Then maybe he's physically incapable of being part of the ring. Yeah.
I think the thing that struck me this morning is all the comparisons to the Profumo affair.
Yes,
and that the sort of dissonance between the days when people would just resign, or at least offer their resignation, and a system today where it seems there's such a totalizing effect of corruption that it's a system that's forgotten how to be ashamed.
I would refer back to the Chesterton commentaries on the Marconi scandal, in which it was just before and during the First World War, where several cabinet ministers, David Lloyd George and the Samuel brothers, who were a very prominent family of practicing Jews who were very high up in the Liberal Party at the time, were found to have committed insider trading with shares in the Marconi company. And G.K. Chesterton's brother, Cecil Chesterton, launched a case against them on these grounds. I believe the Chestertons eventually lost, but it was basically proved in all but name that very dodgy behavior had occurred. And Chesterton later wrote in his autobiography in 1936 that he said that was the day the scales fell from the eyes of the British people, in the sense that up to that point, it was believed that that gentlemen and kind of cabinet ministers and people of high position could be trusted to maintain. They could basically be trusted to be moral and to be responsible with the positions they were given. And he said from that day on, that was it. The whole illusion was shattered. And the saddest part about it was that from then on, it actually became easy to be corrupt because nobody held you to that standard. It didn't matter anymore. And I do wonder, I mean, as far gone as we are, could it just get worse? I mean, if this just becomes normalized, if it's just expected now that average, members of the Western elite will commit heinous acts on children and, get involved in this kind of thing, how much lower can it go, basically?
Well, cultural memory is so brief. I mean, I listened into a bit of LBC this morning to Nick Ferrari.
Yeah, I was listening to that.
Yeah. And he did the thing of, many of you won't know what the Profumo affair was.
Yeah, I was listening to that in my car. Amazing.
And the funny thing is they got some expert in, to talk about it. And one of the first things he talked about the Profumo affair. He mentioned Cliveden. And I thought, it's pronounced Cliveden. You're supposed to be an expert on the Profumo affair.
Very, very, very fast. Did you note the caller who called into Nick Ferrari, who was talking about how this exposes the fact that democracy is an illusion?
I missed that one. That was before I tuned in. Yeah,
many of the talking points that he brought up were very familiar to readers of my best-selling book and viewers of this channel.
No way.
And I noticed that Nick Ferrari kind of quite abruptly kind of ended the call. Well, you let him go for a couple of minutes, but then he didn't. He kind of swiftly moved on without elaboration. So find Ferrari is a slimy character, Simon. I come to
really
dislike him.
I hadn't listened for years to the channel, but I realized, because I'd mostly listened to Talk TV recently and I hadn't listened to LBC for years, but I tuned in and you could see that why LBC has the traction it does. It's much more zingy and magazine tabloidy than I remembered it being in the past, where it did tend to be a bit more sort of worthy. I mean, I'm talking about 25 years ago, where the conversations weren't quite as punctuated by sort of offers of this, offers of that, quick adverts for the latest TV thing. And it was all very upbeat and glitzy. And Ferrari, to be fair, knows how to play his audience well and shuffle them along in a kind of a way that doesn't offend them, when he knows he has to get rid of them.
Yeah, there's one of the things that Nick Ferrari does that I really despise is that because I listen to him every morning now driving here because my phone is broken, as people know. He does this line in kind of like deliberately riling up his audience about let's say the Muslims, right, or Muslim immigration or something, deliberately really quite riling them up. But then he'll have like a Muslim guest on who he's really pally with, right? And then a caller will come in saying, "Oh, you can't trust these guys. They're just for their own people and all that." And he'll be like, "How dare you? What about my friend then, Mohammed, that I was just talking to?" And then so he does this thing where he's deliberately riling people up, but then he falls back on all the liberal, like it's a very odd. It's like deliberately provoking outrage, but then acting as the Piers Morgan, if you want to put it that way.
If you want to imagine the future, imagine Nick Griffin being booed on Question Time forever and ever and ever. It's the same cycle of kind of psychological cuckoldry, isn't it? It's deliberately tapping into something is there and then ridiculing it. It's like when David Lammy was on LBC, and they managed to get that kind of rhetorical victory about him being English. It's just how they manage it. It's the letting you think that you've got one over them, and then putting the knuckle dusters on in the liberal frame.
Do you think using organized tactics, we could just signal jam, like make life a living hell for LBC by getting people to ring in constantly?
Yeah, we could. We
awkward talking points and things that that they won't have a comeback for.
We wouldn't need that many people. I mean, we'd have to run like a kind of little briefing course for a few days. Make sure everyone was on the same page, hone the sharpest rhetoric, and then just never stop ringing so that no one else can get through.
And you'd have to call yourself something like Marion in Chiswick or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Tim from Ruslip.
They do another really annoying thing, which is that when there's big stories and things, sometimes they retreat into like hyper domestic stories and things like this whole weekend they were talking about this robbery in Richmond, or there was another occasion when it was all kicking off with Trump and Iran and so on. Instead of talking about that, they spent the entire day talking about vets and the price of like getting a dog treated. And there would be like old women ringing in saying, "Oh, I had to have Ralph put down. He was 19 years old." And it's like, fucking hell now. There's been 2 hours of old women ringing in about having to put down their dogs. You know what I mean? And they do that. They do that. It's like a strategic kind of. We're not going to talk about real news today. We're going to talk about this shit instead.
Yeah. It's a sort of tactical tonality of the unflappable British. The world can be sort of blowing up, and they'll talk about a poodle who can tap dance or something like that. And it'll be showing how unflappable we are, our blitz spirit, and well, these big things, they're not that important.
Yesterday, Nick Tellety Straight was literally talking about video game addiction, right? In the middle of the Epstein fight, like he talked about video game addiction. Today it was all about Mandelson. But yesterday or the day before, it was video. The story was are people playing too many video games? Which is like, I mean, to me that is just the sort of thing, when there's literally no news at all, and all of the front pages run different stories. Maybe the Guardian might run that or something.
Yeah,
they chose that day to do that. Do you know what I mean? It's like very strange, very strange. Anyway, shall we get? I'll remind people to pick up courses at the Academic Agency, of course, as many thousands of you have. Hat, where can people find you and your work?
On my YouTube channel, which is simply Panama Hat, and my Twitter, which is Panama Hat Rides Again, because it's the second one.
And yourself, Simon?
And I'm on Twitter at Simon__Roberts, and I will refer you to my esteemed colleague Panama Hat and his channel, which has revived recently. Go and watch.
So let's make a start then on Can't Get You Out of My Head. We are here reviewing Adam Curtis. I wonder if Curtis will touch the Epstein files. That'd be an intro, because it's right up his street, is it not? I mean, every element of it is, people believe they were living in a democracy, but in fact, the world was run by this guy from his padded
It feels
cell.
like it would be difficult for him not to, if, as he suggests, his magnum opus, or perhaps swan song or penultimate doco is going to be on the big story of America. I mean, sort of, how could you not? And he wouldn't be able to ignore something. He always kind of does use certain things like, the Trump election or something, or Brexit as a kind of bookmark to revolve around, even if he doesn't sort of emphasize it too much. So it feels like he'll have to, given where things are at.
I can just see it now. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Basildon, Peter Mandelson was making a phone call. It's just waiting to be made.
Yeah.
And anyway, let's get back to this.
Yeltsin responded by dissolving Parliament. He cut the phone lines and sealed the building off. But a group of protesters broke through, and fighting began around the Parliament, and then spread to the television station. Yeltsin portrayed it as a stark battle of good against evil. He was backed by President Clinton. Clinton said it was the only way for Russia to become part of the new global economy and defeat its dangerous past. But in among the fighting was a man who believed that he knew what was really happening. Edward Limonov had been expelled from the Soviet Union 20 years before. He had lived in New York in the 1970s, the moment when the banks who now ran the global system were beginning their rise to power. Limonov was convinced that what was happening now had nothing to do with democracy. It was what he called the geopolitics of money, a force that had already enslaved the American people and now wanted to bend the Russian people to its will.
Pretty far-sighted analysis, I would suggest.
Yeah, completely correct, as far as I can see.
And when Yeltsin ordered the tanks to attack the Russian parliament, backed by the American president and by the bankers and the economic experts, Limonov decided he was going to fight this system because he knew its one weakness. It told no stories about the past, and it had no vision of the future. Its only aim was to keep the system stable. Limonov had visited the Serbian nationalists who were besieging the city of Sarajevo. He was the guest of their leader, Radovan Karadzic. Karadzic told him about the powerful nationalism that was now reawakening after the fall of communism.
Serbs used to possess the entire ground. We own this country. This is our country. Turks have been here occupiers, and the Muslims are successors of those occupiers.
So the traditional imposed geopolitics.
Geopolitics, yes, exactly. Ovo je gospodin Limonov, pisac ruski, veoma poznat.
Limonov became notorious when he was then filmed firing a machine gun in what seemed a random manner into the city below.
You are very courageous people. You, despite anything.
So you're just shooting at anything there?
Well, it's difficult to say from this. He claims he wasn't actually aiming at anyone. He was aiming at areas where there weren't any people. But he also talked about a lot of it sort of played badly. I think there was no sort of love lost between the Russians and the Serbs. But Limonov really was emphasizing that, as before with the October coup in 1993, here again, he's kind of taking it's almost like a sort of war tourism in a way, because he's trying to forge a kind of aesthetic, sense of revolt against the system, rather than being an active combatant. He almost gets killed actually near the TV center when that's being attacked in 93. He sort of has a near miss with a bullet, and he goes off to Serbia now. It feels very much that he was operating off the experience he had in the US, where he felt pretty much the US system was actually just better at containing dissidents and was more authoritarian than anything that was going on in Russia. And so when he came back, he was exiled in Paris for a long time, and he came back to Russia just before the 93 events kicked off. He was determined, as Curtis is suggesting here, to kind of forge a new story, a new narrative, one that did go back to a sort of a patriotism. He actually, when he was actually kicked out in the early 70s, he had meetings with the KGB, and they said, look, we kind of don't want you around anymore. Off you go to America. And then when he came back, he had another meeting 20 years later with the KGB. And he said in some of his diary about the time, he said, it was funny because I actually realized we had more in common than we thought. And I saw that they were actually patriotic men like me, and we sort of laughed about it at that point, as just as it was kind of on the turn, with Yeltsin kind of, fumbling the wheel, and as the Americans were trying shock therapy to kind of, drastically reorientate the Soviet mindset.
One of the things that I find interesting here is that nationalism might work for Russia because it's Russia, right? But for Serbia, it ended up being suicidal if we actually look at what happened.
Well, I mean, I suppose it's more a case of geopolitics, isn't it? In that, if you're at the end of the day, the Western powers decided that Serbian nationalism was not to be in the form that it was then being expressed. All those Albanian kids called Tony Blair.
I guess my point is that the Western powers have the power to say, if Serbia wants to go nationalist, no, that's not allowed to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas it does not have the power to say that to Russia. Hence, that's why it's gone the way it's gone. So
yes,
this comes back to my basic issue with is there such a thing as nationalism in the abstract, or small scale nationalism, or is it just a game of empires all the time? Because let's face it, Russia can do it because Russia's an empire. Serbia tries to do it and it gets stopped.
Well, what to use a counterexample, what about something like Ireland, which was in the crux of an empire much more powerful than itself, but was able to carry out that kind of petty nationalism?
American backing.
Right. Okay.
American backing. Unless, you could use the case of Ukraine now, right? It's like, well, we're going to back this one. You can have nationalism because we're going to back it to the hilt against, an enemy empire. And essentially, that's what happened with the Irish. And that'll be my read of it anyway. So.
It's against you. It's a great.
And look at what's happened to Ireland now. It's become almost the pure expression of a vassal.
Well, yeah. Now it's just fully gay. Yeah.
great power of almost
the entire
15,
world.
yeah, 15 countries against you, and you resist. And I repeat again, we Russians, we should take example from you.
Limonov realised that something was re-emerging from the past in Bosnia that might have the power to confront the new system of global money. It was nationalism, and the national myths that came with it. They were powerful stories that linked people together and gave them a collective power. Something that individualism...
Also, see, I don't want to sound harsh here, but right, the national myth of Bosnia. Like, who fucking gives a shit? Am I being like ridiculous?
I suppose the Bosnians do.
Right, but you see what I'm saying? I mean, I remember I went to Croatia, right, and I was in Zagreb, and I remember the person I was with, I was like, is this what it's like to be in the capital city of a quite mediocre country? And I just felt like, okay, all right, fair enough. But I'm not trying to be like, you want to sound like, how can I put this? If you've been a major power, or if you've been an empire, or if you've been something, it's kind of like, I always think it's easier to play into those national myths because there's quite a lot of meat there. But if you're kind of quite a minor nation whose history is literally just kind of getting conquered over and over again, or we had independence in 1992 or something like this, it's just a lot more difficult. I mean, I've always felt this way about Welsh nationalism, Pat. I know that's quite a big thing back home. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are Welsh nationalists, and I'm like, well, yeah, but what does it even mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm of the view that Welsh nationalism doesn't actually exist. It's what is called Welsh nationalism is just kind of Bevanite socialism with shit livery attached. I mean, it doesn't have any relevance to the history of the Welsh ethnos or people or culture or anything like that.
But then what does it manifest in reality? Like literally Plaid saying, "Oh, those bastards in London don't give us enough money."
Yeah, and wanting more foreign immigrants, just like the Irish. It's not a real thing. I mean, I think the question of when people adopt nationalism is basically when they're forced to by circumstance. In that, for most of history, nationalism is not really an understood concept in the sense that it is kind of post 1800s. So the emergence of it is actually in some ways, I mean, you've said this before, it's part of the decline. Like very often when, I mean, for example, when does Turkish nationalism arise? It's when the Ottoman Empire is finished,
Yeah.
Essentially nationalism is a reformulation when the imperial concepts die off, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what it is when you're pushed to do it by circumstance. I mean, perhaps the reason there's no such thing as a kind of true Welsh or Scottish or arguably Irish nationalism nowadays is because they're still well settled within their various empires. You don't need a true nationalism if you're still comfortably within that framework, which they basically are.
But let's face it, if you go for like an independent Wales or something, you're going to get fucking curb stomped. What can you do as an independent Wales? I mean, I have to say, in Crusader Kings 2, I've done my best to take a lot of the map. I took all of United Kingdom and Iceland and most of the Scandi countries, but there's still a limit to what you can do because at some point you come up against the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm like, oh fuck, I'm not having that battle because I'm
The only framework that a Welsh nationalism of that type can exist under is a modern kind of UN gay protected one, because Wales will be independent in the same way that Kosovo is, right? It would just have to be guaranteed by a larger power. And obviously it doesn't make any sense because there isn't any genuine appetite for that to be the case, for Wales to be separate from England, because the two are joined at the hip, literally. I mean, for the entire history of these places being populated, there's been significant intercourse between the two areas. You're not going to have a hard border at kind of Monmouthshire and Denbighshire. It's not going to work.
Welsh nationalist talking points are things like, oh, the English, they've been leeching our water for years, they've been taking our energy and all this sort of stuff, and what are we getting into it? But the fact of the matter is that if Wales was cut off from England, everybody would starve.
But I mean, exactly. But this isn't even nationalism in the kind of mid 1800s kind of classic sense of the word. This is just grievance politics. This is just it's because you know like the old woke hierarchy thing where you got like, you know, if you're, I don't know, black and disabled and gay, you're at the top, and then, you know, obviously you've got white straight persons at the bottom. It's almost kind of like that. Whereas in the kind of leftist liberal framework, being Celtic means that you're allowed to have a kind of ersatz nationalism to complain against the English, but the English aren't allowed that because they're the dominant group. Because it's acknowledged that they have the upper hand. In the inverted pyramid, they're not allowed to have nationalism, whereas the Celts are.
This actually plays out sometimes. Did you see there was this football guy, right? Kind of like a UEFA guy or a FIFA guy or something, who made this little joke, right? He made some little joke, and he said, "Oh, and remarkably, you know, even he made some little quip about how even the British didn't kick off, like with their history of violence, so football violence." And he just made a little quip about, you know, maybe even the British will behave or something. And then when he had a backlash against that at the World Cup now, because there's a World Cup coming up, and he was saying like maybe even the British won't get arrested this time or something like this. And then when he was kind of forced to apologize, he came out and said, oh, I realize I may have caused offense, so I'm sorry to any Scottish people or Welsh people or Northern Irish people who may have been listening, and then conspicuously left out the English part as a kind of, I can still dab on the English by enlisting this grievance politics in the rest of the country type thing. You know, this was another LBC call-in, Simon. This is sort of shit they talk about on there. But I still find it an interesting little dynamic. I mean, I guess the UK as a whole is facing this problem at a larger scale, really.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah. It's very much Curtis's angle. He's got on his old blog a piece called "The Years of Stagnation and the Poodles of Power," where he's talking about why this, as Panama is suggesting, it's symptomatic of an empire in decline. In the 70s. You know, he's talking about a post-political generation that came up in Russia, and who had retreated from all conventional political ideologies. They rejected communism and they rejected the West as well, and they sunk themselves into what he calls radical avant-garde culture in music and literature. And they were, you know, protesting against what they saw as the absurdity of the system. And the absurdity was that people were beginning to notice, you know, I mean, it's all very, very similar to where we are now, that, you know, people essentially are beginning to loot the system. From the inside, and you've got obviously this sort of the invasion of Afghanistan, and that seen, you know, a disastrous failure, and that again begins to sort of darken the mood in these countries. So you know, people like Limonov were trying to, you know, as I say, do this kind of nationalist tourism, as you know, to get the flavour of what it would be like to sort of create a surge of nationalist revivification. In order to offer some sort of story, because people had, you know, their belief in the elites had collapsed, which, again, as I say, is very resonant with the moment we're in now.
Country in which I've spent so much of my adult life and admire so much.
You got it in there one more time.
Could never do.
Men are bastards, you should be near the front. I'll need you later, right? Ah, we're coming. Oh, I remember the 60s. I used to dress like that.
Well, she deliberately dressed like Pulp Fiction there. She looks a lot like Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction, that woman.
Maybe.
But to the extent where I thought it was a clip from Pulp Fiction initially.
In the end, Julia had realised that her psychiatrist was never going to let her have surgery. She was, he said, not ladylike enough and too pushy.
Have you ever met any fucking women? Oh, anyway, sorry.
she had gone to a private surgeon and finally become what she had always known was the true person.
I occasionally find feminists quote tweeting me agreeing with something, but they always throw in, "We have to forgive his past misogyny." Past.
But only weeks after the surgery, she had collapsed from bleeding. She was taken into hospital unconscious, where she was treated for a suspected miscarriage by doctors who had no idea of her medical history. The surgery was damaged. She could no longer have sex.
Oh.
And Amia left her. And she was alone.
If the truth be known, some of my friends have never, ever asked how I feel, how I am, why I'm always alone. People, or there are one or two people that I've actually discussed the problems with the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and the person that I told only used it against me, and he went off with somebody else. And when I asked, well, why, it's thrown in my face, well, you're not a real woman anyway, what am I supposed to do? And when you get knocks like that and you have to face up to that kind of thing.
Well, why are you taking straight then? That'd be question number one. I mean, surely you'd just go for the gay market, wouldn't you?
Oh, I mean, just
tactical error.
The whole thing is just so sort of tragically hilarious. I mean, it's just. I know I said it last week, but it does feel like some sort of lost episode of Ripping Yarns or something. Northern lad wants to be woman, can't have sex no more. It's just so bizarre. But then what? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I mean, all this idea that being kind of surgically mutilated will result in some great inner happiness. It just. I mean, the really tragic thing is that it was allowed to go this far. That people didn't intervene, or that something couldn't be done.
I mean, this is obviously pre all of the kind of very emphatic, trans advocacy that we see nowadays. Julia Grant, was sort of notable in saying that having the sex change operation didn't solve all of the problems that you're going to have if you're in a state of what was considered gender dysphoria at that time. And Julia was opposed to gender reassignment for children. So it sort of falls a bit between where people are now, where they're sort of trying to, push the agenda further and further. Whereas this, as Panama is saying, is a kind of an early, unformed, tragic kind of case for the person involved. But as you say, it's predictable because it's a big ask.
Yeah. It looks a bit like Peter Kay here, this particular shot.
Ties in quite neatly with my video this morning, which was on the trans, which just by chance. I didn't plan it that way. It's just worked out. Got a thematic trans day on the channel today.
I suppose it makes you just a little bit wary. Most people listening to that would say, oh, what a shame, how sad, but I suppose if love slapped me in the face, I wouldn't even recognise it now.
Julia had challenged the old power in Britain. She had stood up against her psychiatrist and won. Her victory was a symbol of the decline of that old paternalism. But now she had...
Foucault fist-pumping. Victory over the psychiatric order.
Hang on, though. Didn't he just say that the psychiatrist refused to sanction the operation, so he went to a private clinic?
That's right, yeah.
How I mean, that's not... It's not really a victory, is it? It's just dodging game, surely.
Yeah. Well, I think Curtis is putting it in the terms of of the person who he's studying.
Right. Okay.
But Julia went to a private surgeon called Michael Royal. John Randell, the doctor who was doing the quizzing in the last episode and was being pretty tough, just wouldn't accede, and so Julia had it done privately, and it was botched and it went wrong.
I mean, couldn't you just have gone to a private surgeon in the first place then? If that's or was it a question of cost or what?
He was trying to do it in the NHS,
right?
So
free.
discovered how difficult individualism could be. That when things go wrong, you are weak and alone.
She got capitalist surgery rather than a socialist one. She had it done on the NHS, it maybe wouldn't have gone wrong.
Well, I mean, if she'd been Iranian, he'd been Iranian, we could have had it done under the caring socialist Islamic State.
But I still think this makes, look, his justification for that is kind of like, it's more important to maintain the sex norm, the gender norm of male and female getting married, than it is like, that is actually the conservative to do, to just make the gay guy troon out. It's kind of an interesting, it's kind of bizarre but interesting, because it's basically saying like, look, you can do it, but you have to live as a woman, and basically because you're wearing a hijab, nobody's going to know, right? And you just keep that under wraps.
Maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's the hijabs. Maybe it's as long as you're under basically a bin liner, no one can tell, so it doesn't matter.
Just to add to this, the broader point, obviously, Curtis is making this comparison with the dissidents in Russia and Limonov, and I think the idea is that it's when, I mean, not to do a deliberate pun, but when systems are in transition in terms of power relations, there's this bit where individualism just won't quite work for you. I mean, Limonov's dissidents in Russia essentially failed because he came up against the very realistic political view of people like Surkov, who managed oppositional forces within the system by creating them and posing them adversarially against each other. Limonov was a kind of, in a sense, an idealist populist who wanted a return to the power of the individual, of people gathering collectively to enact political change, and he used this kind of sort of cut up technique of political movements blending old Bolshevism and fascism and creating this aesthetic to try and almost infuse change into being. And in the end, actually, the system just left him behind, really, and his project failed. And similarly, this idea here of trying to literally have your individuality become something that you can technocratically manage in a system like ours is going to fail.
There's a bit of argy in the chat because there's this fellow saying this person really needed help and that we should have empathy and so on. That's your department, Simon, as the guy with the F in your initials. I have just a cold int J systematic outlook, which means I don't have any feelings. So I mean, on a human level, do you empathize?
Yeah, I do. I can understand. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about the state. I don't have a theory of mind for trans, so I don't know what the desire is rooted in. But there is always, basically with me, the sense that you have to appreciate reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, and negotiate that in some way. But if you're attempting to sort of do the biologically impossible, you have to recognize that whatever it's going to be is a compromise and a medical risk, and how far do you go with that? So I can be sort of sympathetic, and this is a time when there are no kind of prevalent ideological structures that are going to support someone in that position, whereas of course now it's very different, and essentially it's becoming mandatory. But at this time you can understand the sort of alienation, but Julia's story is one of someone who felt, first of all, it was somebody making themselves an outsider within their society already. Julie Grant felt, she couldn't be part of the gay scene and had to define in this way, and was unable to be supported by the state systems. So it's incredibly risky, from a psychological point of view.
So my tendency would be to say, well, can I use this individual as a weapon against my ideological enemies? Could they be politically useful? I mean, clearly they're not, mentally well, but that's not my problem.
Yeah.
What about the struggle, comrade? It could be used, and then if the revolution comes, then there could be a problem after that.
I mean, my sense is, if people want to do these things, I'm not a libertarian, but it's up to them to do these things. But consequentially, this is a difficult and risky thing to do.
Go on.
I was just going to say, surely from any revolutionary point of view, this is just the most bourgeois kind of lackadaisical thing you could do, really. I mean, this is the whole communist argument against homosexuality in all forms, right? That not only is it bourgeois, but according to someone like Maxim Gorky, it's actually fascist. He said at the heart of all fascism are the gays. In all four, National Socialism, Italian fascism, Francoism. He said it's all homosexuals.
Could they not be used as some sort of lumpen prole coalition in a kind of Napoleonic counter-gang style situation? I mean,
probably. I mean, you could, but it depends on how you'd be able to control them. I mean, there's that book Evola, the Sufi of Rome, the alleged written by the guy that allegedly knew him. There's a whole bit in that about how he meets all these young men who are in the neo-fascist movement, and they go up to see Evola, and they have these kind of great conversations with him. Then they'll come down from his flat, and the guy will just try to kiss him. And it happens every single time. It's is it sort of like the more right wing you get, the more you end up with these sort of sensitive young men. I mean, to be honest, I don't know that Maxim Gorky was entirely wrong about the link between kind of classical homosexualism and fascism. But it's by the by.
Could be something to do with an extreme personality type.
Yeah.
Clearly, you've got to be on some sort of spectrum of extreme personality type to engage in these sorts of things in the first place. So maybe it is the fate of such people never to truly be the sensible centrist.
And this is the thing. It feels like there's people who perhaps psychiatrists would say they're congruent with their psychosexual adjustment. And this is what is wanted for them. That's fine, but it feels like for a lot of people it becomes a surrogate issue, as it has in our age, to express other kinds of antipathies to, a systemic sense of alienation, and that's what I guess people have campaigned against as the woke in recent years. That it's become an artificial method of recreating rebellion and anger towards society for some people, and it has these disastrous consequences when a friend was telling me recently, people who have sort of tried to commit suicide by jumping from a high place, and the few who've survived have talked about it and said the moment they jumped they instantly regretted it, even though they were wanting to kill themselves. So there's always that need to project yourself a little further into the future.
Before we continue, I don't want to get all critical drinker, or who was that guy Mauler? Do you remember that guy Mauler? Who was always, being like, oh, that journey in Game of Thrones was impossible. How did they get there to there? If we plot it on a map, that would have taken 4.2 days, but actually in the plot, it's only said 2 days, and so on. Earlier on in the plot of this movie that we're watching, he said, oh, the sex change had gone wrong, and it meant that this individual could not have sex anymore. Now, I don't want to get too graphic here, folks, but how does that work? Because, I mean, surely they can still do it the other way.
Well, because they don't actually give you a female sex organs, do they? They just cut a hole. And
But I don't want to become a biology teacher here, but other holes are available.
No. Well, I think probably what he's saying is that without either a male or female organ, and presumably due to the devastation that was wreaked on that area by whatever hack surgeon did it, probably just it would be too painful or the hormones would be too messed up to feel pleasure or something. Because this is what happens when you go slashing about down there. I mean, you will ruin everything.
Oh dear.
Infection risk, all kinds of things. I mean, surgeons. There are graphic videos on YouTube to explain the sort of nature of the operation. I mean, David Pearson, the director of the documentary about Julia Grant, A Change of Sex, I think I read that he'd actually either seen the surgery happening, actually witnessed it. You know, the production team had actually watched it happening, and he was freaked out by it completely. So
it's horrible.
You know,
there's if you want some really disturbing reading, I don't know where you'd find it now, but if you look at the mainly Reddit posts by transsexuals who have just woken up after the surgery.
Yeah.
And they realize it's like the guy that's just jumped off the edge of the building, Simon, and then they immediately regret it. It's genuinely some of the most psychologically disturbing stuff I've ever read, because they realize what it is they've done. And it's, horrendous. Terrible mutilation.
I won't be able to look any of this stuff up now, of course, because based Keir Starmer has made an age check on every single part of the internet, so there'd be no way to even check it, I believe.
Yeah, so. I mean, if it was up to me, if I was in charge, I'd just pass an act barring all this kind of stuff. I'd pass, the Abominations Act or something, and just make it prohibited for anybody to perform this kind of surgery.
Why do they? I mean, again, I don't want to go too much into this because it's a kind of icky, it gives me the ick, as the cool girls say, right? But what is the purpose of going the full hog? Like, why can't they just dress up in the ladies' clothes and keep all the bits?
Again, I have no theory of mind for this.
That's like saying, why can't the alcoholic only drink a third of the bottle of whiskey, isn't it? It's because you become psychologically fixated upon an end goal that you believe is possible. And especially, I mean, given all the ideology out there nowadays that will back you on this, they'll say, no, there is no such thing as biology. All sex, all gender is just a social construct, which means that there is no such thing as a base reality, and you can do whatever you want.
All right.
And then you say, okay, well, if you delude yourself into thinking you want to be a woman, then you say, okay, doc, pop, do whatever you have to do, and you believe that you can transform into a woman. And of course, you can't, because there is such a thing as biological reality.
I blame the Enlightenment.
What I would do is I'd round up the troons, the pre-surgery troons, and they're on the ledge. They're saying, I'm going to go through with this. I've saved up all the money, and I'd show them the Only Fools and Horses Christmas special with Del Boy on the phone trying to make that final deal, even after he's a millionaire. And it becomes obvious that Del Boy's, it wasn't the actual achievement of the money, it was the chase, it was the dream, and achieving the dream actually ended up destroying Del Boy's life. So yes. I would show them that. I'd be like, look, you don't actually have to go through with this. Just have it as an unachievable end goal and never actually go through with it.
Well, I think that as well, my guess, I've got no data or anything to back this up, but my guess is that most of these modern transsexuals are people who have the same kind of alienation as kind of like, the young fascist or something, where it's sort of, they're so alienated from all the structures that exist. I imagine most of them are probably unemployed. They spend all their time on the internet, in kind of weird chat rooms and Discord servers and things that just talk about this stuff endlessly. They encourage it. That becomes the sort of the last hope of actualization. That in itself becomes a kind of world where you made that video where you're talking about how you need to have your mission and the kind of metaphysical over. I think that in itself becomes the mission. That it becomes this kind of mystical goal. It's like an Animal Farm, how they're told they're all going to go to Candy Mountain or something. It's this irrational faith-based belief in an eventual kind of becoming into something else, if you like. So they're not really thinking about it rationally. It's just that is their method of dealing with the alienation, you could argue.
I mean, it's a kind of fork in the road from, when we went back to like Century of the Self, and you saw that there was the moment where the counterculture accepted that it couldn't take on the force of the state. And the idea was then that it would it would pursue rebellious interiority. Let's say it would take its struggle inside, and you would change the person you were from within. And this actually, in a way, feels much more like the current sense of reality is kind of plastic and consumerist, and we can change it. It's, akin to the sort of, the tech bro push for transhumanism. We refuse to accept that we're not going to go inside and just, quietly die with our dreams. We're going to use all the sort of tools of technology to enforce our reality. And, as we've been saying, I think that there's just these elements that, these pictures you see of, the girl before she went to university, and then 2 years after she went to university, and she's tattooed and pierced and all, and just looks terrible. It feels a product of a consumer age, without being too glib about it.
I wonder if efforts could be put into lowering the expectation of the end goal. Just put on some lippy, love. You'll be all right. Just put on some lipstick and wear a wig, and call it a day.
Well, yeah, that's the problem in an age of rhetoric about a sort of delimited existence. It's very difficult to persuade people of the the constrained vision.
but this is it, because they're not dealing with this. It's not like someone who puts on an occasional drag show where they wear a wig and some lippy, is it? It's someone who is catastrophically dissatisfied with the entire system around them and their own being within that system. So they basically they feel subconsciously there is no choice but to destroy it in its entirety by turning it into something else. Of course, you can't do that, but they believe they can. So that it's not a question of just someone having a bit as I say, someone just wanting to dress up a bit flamboyantly. It's much darker than that.
Yeah, I've ended up in the same place as you, Simon. I have no theory of mine for this. So we're going to have to move on. It's hard. It's hard. It's just almost impossible to understand for us, I think.
Yeah, it's the attempt to medically change reality is something I came across when I used to run a medical practice. You would get people who, and it was mostly, in fact, it was almost always young women who would come in with, chronic fatigue syndrome, I suppose people would call it, but they became ultimately bedridden, and they starved themselves, and usually what would knock them off, they would have a heart attack, basically. But it was when you often went into the cases really, and you found out what the family background was, it was very often rooted in things like sexual abuse in the family. People were sort of very, very severely traumatized, and in attempting to there was a theory, I think, that when you attempt to control what you put in your mouth, again, you can sort of relate that to possible sexually traumatic experiences that people have undergone, that controlling what you put in your body, it's a kind of a controllable analog for acts of sexual violation, restricting your food intake.
Very dark.
But as individuals were beginning to feel the limitations of their power, the new class that had grown up to manage them was growing stronger and more confident. And they began to see democracy not just as something to be bypassed, but as a potentially dangerous force. By the mid-1990s, technocrats in the political think tanks in the West were becoming frightened that elections all across the world were producing what they called the wrong kind of result.
The age-old problem with the Democrat, when the people don't elect who you need them to elect.
just for our American viewers there, that shot of the Thames there with the dark skyscraper on the right-hand side, that was the Millbank Tower. That was the New Labour HQ. The kind of Barad-dûr of the Tome regime.
In Algeria, a party called the Islamic Salvation Front took the majority of votes in the first round of an election. It was a stunning victory. But people feared that its real aim was to turn the country into an Islamist state and get rid of democracy. Western politicians found themselves supporting a military coup that stopped the elections.
Well, that wasn't very democratic, was it?
No.
This was this point in the early 90s that I remember very vividly. Because I had friends who were doing things like psychology at university, and they were very much becoming the class of the technocrats of the future, well-meaning people, but the idea of the wrong result would be instinctive to them. Of course it's the wrong thing that they're voting for. I remember in particular there was a moment. I was living in Australia at the time, and this is when I sort of first became kind of opposed to the socio-political mode of acquiescing. And I wasn't radically political, but there was an event where there was a TV debate with, I think he's Canadian, he's an environmentalist called David Suzuki, and he was doing interviews with people with sort of dissident views, and he was interviewing someone who was a self-declared Nazi. And I had a couple of friends who were sort of doing psychology, and they watched this particular interview, and it was related to me that, basically Suzuki dealt with this Nazi by listening to what he had to say, and then eventually saying to him, you're ridiculous, you're an idiot, I completely reject what you say. And that was it. And that seemed to be him BTFOing the Nazi. Yeah. And I countered this and I said, well, isn't that the point of democracy? That, the Nazis have free speech as well. Isn't that the moral undergirding of the system? Isn't this the fundamental trade-off? We have democracy, so people can say what they think, and I was thought of as being just deeply weird. Shouted down.
You haven't understood that the actual point of democracy is to punch Richard Spencer in the face. I mean, it still comes back to that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you take democracy at face value, then this is the whole problem, isn't it? I mean, this is that infamous thing that Karl Popper came up with, where he said that, well, actually, in order for democracy and liberalism to work, you can only have liberal and democratic opinions in that system. So you have to be illiberal when it comes to anyone who's a liberal. It's sort of like, well, what's the point then if it's just self-correction?
It is in fact the Schmittian. It is the exact problem that Carl Schmitt was trying to deal with in the friend-enemy distinction. Because if you understand Schmitt correctly, he's saying, like, look, in any parliamentary system, if the two sides actually become friends and enemies internally, you've got a huge problem. It's all right to have enemies externally, right? But everybody internally ultimately has to be part of the same thing. So in a strange way, Popper is correct that a system cannot really book genuine disagreement. Otherwise, it's going to come apart.
Yeah.
Because, disagreement, friend-enemy distinction in politics is a precursor to war, basically. That was Schmitt's whole point, that every system tends towards absolutism precisely because of this. You can have external enemies, but not internal enemies.
Yeah.
And, this is one of the reasons why they've had to pull the gypsy switch on Epstein being Russian and so on, because that's an identifiable external enemy. You cannot have the internal enemy. Otherwise, that causes a structural problem for any system. And unless you actually want to bring about a civil war, that is.
Yeah.
So, and you could argue that's been one of the issues in America, is that people are identifying each other as friend and enemy internally, which is, I mean, not to come over all Tim Pool, that is classically the precursor to civil war. Now, in my view, the civil war is not going to happen, as I've laid out at length previously. But when people genuinely have this animus towards political rivals within the nation, it is a problem. It's a structural problem for any system to deal with, because it can't go anywhere. Go on, Panama.
Well, I think the thing with America and this is the whole reason that the fake David Betts Civil War narrative doesn't play, is because these conflicts are being had within stratums of the regime, in that there's still an overarching order which is still very much in control, and the disturbances are kind of going on somewhere down below. So you don't really get that. There's not really too much of a risk of it tearing itself apart. I mean, the when you get a civil war in say in Spain, where the left and the right tore the country literally in two, what you had there was genuine open conflict. There was no overarching deep state or force acting as a kind of governor. You had a genuine militant left and a genuine militant right, neither of whom could brook the other in power, and there was nothing beyond that. It was that, I mean, it was at every level from the plebs all the way up to the elites. That conflict was playing out, and that's what happened. It just erupted into open civil war. That's basically a precursor to other civil wars. But what's interesting about the current paradigms is that, as I say, you have this governing force which remains in power. In that, Noam Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein are hanging out on a yacht, right? So there's a bunch of MAGA guys and a bunch of hardcore Democrats who see each other as Satan incarnate, but that's on one housing estate, this one housing project in California. It's not genuinely transpiring through the whole system, is it?
Yeah, not yet anyway.
No, but I'd be surprised.
I guess the issue is that the elites, as it were, because I think they foster culture war. I think they actually provoke woke versus anti-woke and these sorts of things. And I do believe there's a high degree of kayfabe involved. But what are they going to do when people genuinely buy into these things? Right? It's a problem, right? It's a problem. Whether it's leftists cheering on rightists being killed or vice versa, that means that a significant portion of the country has identified their ultimate enemy as somebody who could be their neighbor.
I'm not sure that's quite as powerful as it would be because of the filters it's going through, because you've got the internet and the hyper-real and the spectacle, which mean that you can cheer. Say if you're a leftist and you cheer on Charlie Kirk getting shot, that it's because you're not really engaging with the actual killing of a person. It's in the basic sense of the word, it's a meme. You're not actually dealing with what you would be dealing with if you'd say got a pistol and gone out and shot a Republican or shot a Democrat. I don't think it's really a problem for them. In many ways, it helps them, because the more extreme the divides. I mean, if you have people who are into MAGA, who genuinely think that the Democrats coming into power will be like the apocalypse, then it means they'll stick with Trump even if he's revealed to be touching kids. It actually strengthens these pillars, doesn't it?
And in Europe, the extreme right paraded openly. They protested against the immigrants coming from Africa and the Middle East.
The foreigners take away houses in Germany, bring drugs and all kinds of filth. They steal German workplaces and they filthy up the environment.
For me, now, the most important inspiration is Adolf Hitler.
And faced by the horror in the Balkans, President Clinton's representative, called Richard Holbrooke, brought the question out into the open. Suppose elections are free and fair, he said, and those elected are racist, fascist, separatists. That is the dilemma. An American political scientist called Fareed Zakaria put it more bluntly. The people, we are told, he said, are the most important. We are driven by the phrase, the American people are not stupid. But what if they are?
I don't think it's much of a hypothetical anymore, is it?
I would say that I tried to track down this quote from Fareed Zakaria, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I even wondered, I went to the level of paranoia, wondering if it had been scrubbed from the net. That he did write a very similar sentence. I think this was in Newsweek International, And it was, he said, consider, for example, the challenge we face across the Islamic world. We recognize the need for democracy in those often repressive countries. But what if democracy produces an Islamic theocracy or something like it? That was the closest I could find. So I don't doubt Curtis probably has a source, but it's not one that I can any longer find. The reason I don't doubt he has a source is BBC Legal wouldn't have passed it if it couldn't have been attributed to Sakari, but I can't find where. It could have been a verbal in an interview or something that's no longer available. And as I said last week, it's getting increasingly hard to find sources on a number of more controversial issues.
This this just smacks of the thing that Brecht said about the 1955 uprising, where the communist government in East Germany said that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government, and Brecht said, would it not be therefore simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? In a satirical poem, which, that's basically the problem that these liberal elites face, is that in order for them to be elites, they can't be Democrats or liberals. Which this is the kind of political thinking I find the most loathsome, is because they lie to themselves. If they were just open about it, it's actually it's easier to deal with, because you know where they're coming from, but they insist on lying to themselves and everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of what my problem is with the system, really. It basically boils down to the dishonesty.
Yeah.
But if your system is so great, then you must, let the result be as it may, And if the people do elect fascists, well, that's what they've elected.
Yes.
I just want Keir Starmer to cancel all elections, ban Twitter X. Just go for it, Starmer. What are you waiting for? I mean, he's basically done for already, so just go for it, Starmer.
You've got a majority. You could do it. That's the funny thing. I mean, in Britain, we're one of the last countries to not have an American-style binding constitution. So if you've got a big enough majority and your MPs will pass it, you are dictator of Britain. It's theoretically do it. Just saying.
But the political scientists were not alone in distrusting people. For at the same time, a group of behavioral psychologists, who were becoming increasingly influential, were insisting that individuals also made the wrong decisions in the marketplace. They were not behaving in the logical, self-interested ways that economics said they should. The most famous of them was called Daniel Kahneman. He would win a Nobel Prize for his work. For 30 years, Kahneman had been studying human behavior. And he had discovered, he said, that human beings actually...
With Amos Tversky, very sly to cut out his colleague for all of that time. But,
is there any early life on this chap?
I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, his name's Kahneman.
Yeah,
but I should mention a great influence on me.
Yeah. So it's covered in a previous episode. There was an anecdote about when he was accosted by the SS as a child during the war and managed to get off scot-free. The thing he was developing in the 90s was called prospect theory. And a lot of this was sort of really kept into academia. I looked at what he was working on and wondered if it had sort of informed New Labour. And they didn't actually sort of refer to him in the way that they approached campaigning and government, but they sort of, as it was said, instinctively used a lot of the techniques that he had, which he formed concepts about framing and loss aversion. And, people essentially tend to judge situations from where they are now, and everything is relative to that.
Yeah.
So Labour could obviously use that to navigate the idea of policy through the focus group. People would make these choices, which they would take as revealed preferences, etc., etc.
If you want a fantastic summary of the thought of Kahneman, you can read my introduction to exceptionally low-selling book, Shakespeare and Cognition, which is possibly the least read and least cited of all my works.
Is it one of the most expensive as well?
Well, it's a very short book. It was part of this. Came out with Palgrave Macmillan, 2015. But I believe there's a weird audio version of it where the narrator is quite thespy. He's like a very thespy, and he he can't say the name Foucault. He calls him Foucault throughout the book, so that's a little bit upsetting to me. But yeah, but I basically believe this research. I think it's basically true that people do have loss aversion. They are risk averse. They have confirmation bias. They basically like change evidence to fit their pre-existing beliefs. They have tremendous sunk cost. Can't admit that they've been wrong. The past 10 years is proof of that on a mass scale.
Two systems inside their brains. One of them they were aware of, which they thought was in control. The other was an instinctive part that really drove most of their actions, a part that they were completely unaware of. This new psychology was a powerful attack on the whole idea of the confident self, because the picture the psychologists painted of human society was of millions of individuals living most of the time thinking that they were rational and in control, while something else inside them was really guiding many of their actions, without them knowing it. But, Kahneman said, there was an underlying pattern to this irrational behaviour. It meant that if somehow you could gather enough data on human beings' behaviour, you could see the patterns, and so predict what they would do, and manage them. But to do that, you would have to bypass and ignore their conscious self, because it was the behaviour, not the thoughts, that counted.
No, this is a competition I can get behind, lads. Russian bodyguard of the year.
I mean, I take it these aren't the bodyguards. This is just some sort of show.
No, I think these are the bodyguards. Suits you, sir. Suits you. Oh, yeah.
Well, was it Gaddafi who had the squad of all female?
That's right. Yeah.
Bodyguards who
that was in that was in Who Would You Do, Benny? The med event mafia.
And he insisted they were all virgins.
No, that was wasn't that? I think it was Gaddafi who had the all-female bodyguards, but didn't Kim also do it in?
No, I don't think the Kims ever had female guards.
I think there are female guards in Korea. I could be wrong, but
I think there are women in the forces, but I don't think there's like a special squad like.
You remember that film Kill Bill? There's like the she's part of like the female assassin squad or something. I'm pretty sure there's a North Korean female assassin squad or something like that. So.
Maybe. I mean, there were those two women that assassinated his brother, weren't there? In the airport.
Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't his sister like quite a bit of a player, political player.
She's a bit of an icon now, yeah. Although, actually, I've just remembered the two women that killed his brother. The interesting thing about that is that they weren't assassins. They were women they were South Korean women that had been recruited, being told they were part of a game show, and they were made to. It was one of these. They made it like it's one of these shows where you have to do increasingly odd things to win a prize, and they were told that they had to go and find their contact, who was obviously Kim Jong Nam. And they had to like put their hands on his cheeks and kiss him without him, like just run up to him and do it. And they only, they didn't realize that they'd, been given the poison on their fingers, basically rubbed onto them at the last second. I know that sounds far fetched, but it is actually that is what happened. The two women that actually carried out the hit were genuinely civilians.
Make a great plot line for a film, wouldn't it? You remember those sort of extreme Japanese game shows in the 80s?
Oh, yeah.
Where people would be tortured. I mean, you have a film based around the premise that the CIA is recruiting international assassins by game show.
I mean, stranger things have happened.
No, of course.
If I ever became like, Lord Dictator or whatever, I think I'd get myself a set of Russian bodyguards, a set of 6-foot female Russian bodyguards who constantly just dressed like this all the time. What do you reckon?
I think you might cheapen your image. I think it might not play as well with your audience as you might imagine it would.
sitting on the tackiest tiger skin rug imaginable.
You'd look a bit like King Farouk. I don't think it would suit your austere scholar. It's kind of aesthetic that you've managed to build over the years.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think your dictator drip would be good enough, in itself. It would be effortlessly understated and.
Can you imagine you were dealing with Epstein, trying to get yourself one of these women, and he somehow manages to do the gypsy switch on you, and you end up with the fat northern crossdresser instead, like Jeffrey. I clearly ordered a 6-foot Russian bodyguard, and you've sent me this bloody Les Dawson. What's going on?
Do you think he ever, did that to people just to mess with them? They'd order some kind of, risque underage stunner, and he'd send them,
In my head canon, it was always Elon Musk. Whenever Elon tries to get involved, they're always just tricking him and laughing behind his back. And
do you remember? Do you remember that scene in David Lynch's Blue Velvet where they go to the nightclub called Ben's, and it's just like 3 fat old women? I wonder if he'd get people in and be like, this is it. You finally made enough money. You got enough influence. You're going to go to the most secure, exclusive, elite sort of, vice dungeon, and he opens the door and it's just that. It's a really horrible, awful room with like a bunch of fat old women in it, just to mess with people.
I always remember when I went to Amsterdam, right, and we started approaching like the red light district, and in one of the windows there was literally, I'm not kidding now, she must have been like 30 stone, like 55-year-old, like fag hanging out the mouth. I was like, fucking hell.
Yeah, but
this is just it's not what you read about in the books, yeah. Fucking hell.
But surely for some people that is what they're going for.
Oh,
it's got to be a speciality market for that, surely.
There was always, back in the days of the nudie mags on the top shelf. You might be too young, Panama Hat, but I'm sure.
No, because you got to remember that I grew up in Wales, where we're 20 years behind. So I have
you'll remember
strong memories of the.
What was it called, like Razzle or something? But it was just
Razzle,
like the roughest imaginable kind of, but basically like grot bags on the front page,
Well, they still have, like, if you go to the average package shop, they still have an entire top shelf, which is just really awful, desperate.
Who's still buying those? Come on.
I don't know. I've got a suspicion it's sort of like boomer truck drivers maybe who go and buy them, but I got no idea. But they still stock them. I've not been into a petrol station or a package shop that didn't have a shelf of those mags.
I must say, Panama Hat, you cannot use this language.
Sorry. I recant my racism. The correct
he's talking about an ethnically owned corner store.
The correct term is
our Home Secretary.
Yeah.
Worked in when she was growing up. Yeah.
I should have said Asian shop. Sorry.
Yes, exactly. Any offence for anybody in the audience? I profusely apologise.
Yeah, I do apologise for that. Yeah.
And you should know that both me and Panama Hat also have some ethnic admixture in our genetic background, so we cannot possibly be racist, isn't that right?
Well, exactly. Exactly.
Exactly.
It's impossible.
In some ways, you're reclaiming the term.
Yes, exactly. I like to think I'm actually liberating the immigrants in the UK by doing that.
You should ban him like that guy that you saw in the comments. The one that you'd blocked on Twitter, then you saw him in the comments, and you banned him on the channel for good measure.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. If anybody else tells, you blocked me on Twitter. Well, obviously, I'm going to block you again.
I had visions of one of those kind of comedy canings of you being the sort of headmaster, rolling his sleeves up and taking a really long run up.
Is it just autism, or are people like really, really quite stupid when it comes to like?
I think maybe both.
Yeah.
There was a guy, right, who posted a picture. Oh, do you remember that guy in who did the Southport killings? The Alex, what was it?
Copacabana or something.
Yeah, Alex Copacabana. He posted a picture of that, some random fat like Muslim woman, and a picture of me, and said "New Welsh." And then his next tweet was, "Can somebody ask AA why he blocked me?" I'm like, "Hello."
Oh dear.
I wonder why, mate. I mean,
well,
you
have to remember that autism does not correlate to intelligence. You know, they are two separate things.
You could say Int J, but you've got to have at least some even minute theory of mind, Simon. So.
See, this is it again. Your psychological tests have all come to nothing. See, they're all gone.
To develop a faculty of social judgment is all I'm going to say.
Some of my best friends grew up in such shops. I can't name any of them right now, but you know.
This, by the way, this clip here, famous clip. You got Zhirinovsky, the nationalist, on the left there, and Boris Nemtsov, who used to be the deputy prime minister. Nemtsov on the right is taunting Zhirinovsky about sleeping with lots of women. Apparently, Zhirinovsky had given a Playboy interview and was talking about syphilis, and Nemtsov was casting gruesome aspersions at him. That's the context of what you see next.
Господа, я прошу прощения. Ну что вы делаете? Ну что же вы делаете? Ну что же вы делаете? Подонок сейчас, я вообще...
Oh, I want to watch that as a wrestling fan. I have to watch that. It goes pretty amazingly well.
Yeah, that's can we see a replay, please?
We have to watch that. Oh, we can watch these girls as well. Let's get to this.
This is good. The channel's getting sleazy.
So let's
dear.
Let's get back.
You're gonna have a Wahhabist.
It's just so unexpected.
Господа, я прошу прощения.
Ну
что вы делаете? Ну что же вы делаете? Ну что же вы делаете? Подонок сейчас, я вообще... Ну, Ларович, ну так нельзя. Сядьте, пожалуйста. Ну сядьте, пожалуйста. Сядьте, пожалуйста. Оба сядьте, пожалуйста. Ну что ж такое-то?
Pause. I don't know what that footage is of the chap with his head smashed against the windscreen there. I couldn't track that down, but I would add that Nemtsov was assassinated in 2015. If people remember, he was assassinated on the bridge going towards the Kremlin. It was put down to Chechens because apparently Nemtsov had been sympathetic after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris. And a lot of people think it's more likely he was possibly bumped off by the regime because he was a bit of a thorn in the side.
Also, we bring this up because we mentioned the film The Death of Stalin earlier. That was a very controversial film in Russia itself for a number of reasons. And if you want another really good Russian studio fight, it's like the Russian equivalent of Radio 5 Live with Bacon. I can't remember his name. It's like that, but in Russia. And there are these two guys arguing over whether or not Death of Stalin is an offensive film. Mm-hmm. And at one point, the other guy just gets up and decks him. Like he just fully stands up and just lays the other one on the floor. Again, very similar to that one we just saw. But I think it's a testament. They take things more seriously in Russia.
Can I just respond to a comment I've just seen in the chat? Somebody said, "Oh, you could see AA going to the red light district with a fistful of cash." I will have you know that I've always been extremely morally against prostitution. From the age of 16 to now, I absolutely abhor it to the point where, I mean, I have never engaged in any of that sort of thing ever. To me, I mean, I don't know whether it's that, like sometimes my dad is funny about paying for parking. Panama Hat. He never wants to pay for parking anywhere, to the point where he'll even waste like 20 minutes looking for the one free space somewhere rather than.
Oh, that's me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I just think that it's such a cop out in a way, such a cop out to do it. But also, it's demeaning. It's demeaning to the woman. It's demeaning to yourself. It's funding criminal activity. It's just awful. I've always been against prostitution. I'm basically Mary Whitehead at this point. It's against like all sorts of forms.
Did you just go to the red light place to absorb the atmosphere, or
no? It's just like you're in Amsterdam, and it's like, well, there's only so many things to see in Amsterdam. So, and we were walking. I think we were like walking back to the hotel, and we had to go through there or whatever. Where it's like, well, you got to see it at some point, But it was just, I wasn't there, in that capacity. In fact, I had a lady with me, so.
In Russia,
never goes to strip bars. I don't like anything like that. It's just not my. To me, it's just not my. Just hate the idea of it. I hate the idea of the kind of the seedy kind of sad. I mean, I hesitate to say incels, but the kind of like you can imagine the horrible characters in there. You know what I mean?
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm not being judgmental or prudish. If people go off and do stuff, it's up to you. But to me, it's like when I see things like that, it's like you have X-ray vision and you can see all the kind of broken lives that it's covering.
Yeah.
And it's just a horrible feeling.
Not my thing.
President Yeltsin had lost all control.
Oh, the LGBT bar, on the other hand. I'm joking, of course.
Down at Vauxhall Tavern.
Oh, dear.
He was drunk most of the time.
Oh, I love this.
Oh, dear.
I love this so much.
He had become the puppet of the oligarchs, who had taken over all the media.
Goosing the secretary.
And blocked any opposition. But there was one opponent.
Someone in the chat is saying,
sorry.
He's saying AA dancing girls are Persian culture. They can get that hijab on, I tell you. That's what they need, is some discipline. A whole culture. Fall to debauchery all the time. But I agree, Hat. This is very funny.
I love watching drunk Boris Yeltsin compilations on YouTube. It's great.
It was Edward Limonov.
The fascist regime.
He had started his own tiny party. He called it the National Bolsheviks. It was, he said, a fusion of fascism and communism. And the party flag was designed to show this.
To be clear, Simon, this is the chap from New York who we've been watching throughout these films. This guy here.
That is
He worked in a restaurant. His girlfriend was having an affair.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say as well, I mean, in recent times, given how desperate things have become, I've been reading a lot of national Bolshevik literature. And I mean, like, what other path is there at this point? I mean, you can't rely on the money power of capitalism. Marxism is basically dead. Just saying, what other option do we have for the future, really?
Well, I've recorded a few conversations with very strange thinker Todd Lewis, who's got all sorts of strange ideas that we discussed in 3 interviews, which are forthcoming. One of which is replacing the money with energy as a basis for a new way of calculating.
Okay.
And he's got all sorts of very odd ideas, which are I could not really describe them as this, but as something altogether different. And it may be that whatever the thing is something like it seems completely off the wall like that, so completely out of the box, completely unrelated to that which has gone before. Because it seems to me that one of the overarching theses of Adam Curtis, tell me to disagree, Simon, is that so many of these ideologies belong to last century, and these are kind of increasingly futile attempts to recreate them over and over again, whereas in fact we're just in a completely different paradigm, so it's going to require a completely different way of thinking. Something like this.
Yeah. And what Limonov, I should say, was trying to do, as Curtis says on his blog, he was trying to take ideas from the avant-garde art and music scene and create, as he says, a new kind of confrontational politics. Quote, loud denial of so-called values of civilization, grotesque, trash, screaming, some borrowings of rightist aesthetics, which were all common for the New York City punk movement in the 70s, as well as for the National Bolsheviks in the 1990s. So it was a kind of, a sort of, culture jam kind of approach that he took. That was his theory.
But it wasn't simple nostalgia. Limonov wanted to shock people out of accepting the completely corrupt society around them. He wanted to go back to the original roots of fascism and nationalism.
Paul, early bit of experimentation for Harry from Lotus Eaters there. Trying out some new couture in his uni days.
Well, of course, he'd have to get very far away from Lotus Eaters to become this interesting, wouldn't he?
I have to give it to the lads at Lotus Eaters. They have kind of their coverage of the Epstein stuff has been pretty good this past couple of days. Harry in particular has been an interesting person to be watching on their shows of late. I would just say that.
Well, I mean, this does, maybe I'm too cynical, but this does feel a bit like Fell For It Again award territory with the Lotus Eaters. I mean, we know, come on, they're run by Carl Benjamin, for God's sake.
Well, Carl's a good friend of mine, of course, and I can't say a bad word against my friends.
Well, thankfully, he's not a friend of mine, so I can't. And I will.
Oh, here we go.
No. Come on, we move on. We move on before this
you're such a hellraiser, Panama Hat.
Well,
racially attacking innocent shopkeepers earlier on in the stream, and now having a go at trusted Carl.
Trusted. Oh dear. I mean, anyway, let's move on.
To the idea that if you can find a story powerful enough to inspire people, you can then use that collective power both to sweep away the corrupt rulers and change reality. It was something that had been wiped and forgotten because of the horrors it...
Can I just ask, what is the music undercut? Is this another bit of John Carpenter?
Yeah, it's from The Fog.
I thought so.
Piece from The Fog. The banners there are saying Russia is everything else is nothing.
It led to in the past. And the individualism that had been promoted so strongly in the West after the Second World War had been a force shield against that. A shield of one world, composed of just individuals. Limonov was the reappearance of the frightening old dream. The third person to join the party was the musician Yegor Letov. He had led the opposition to communism in the 1980s. Now he sang songs about how Russia was trapped in a frozen world, buried under a mass of meaningless, broken fragments from the past.
Под столетними сугробами библейских анекдотов похотливых православных.
Do you think Curtis is secretly just loving this? So I'm just like, actually, this is what I really want. Low key, kind of promoting Nazbol aesthetic.
Yeah, well, yeah, he talks about liking these ambiguous characters, and Letov was he was kind of, as Curtis says, he shunned the artsy irony of the other kind of anti-establishment bands in favor of raw violence and reckless confrontation against the blandness of the Soviet Union.
But I mean, I hate to be this voice, but is there not an element of LARP with these guys? I mean, leather jackets and a hammer and sickle. And,
yeah, but you've got to start somewhere. And also, I mean, I do think there was definitely, whether he would admit it or not, there was a genuine admiration in the way Curtis said the phrase "the old dreams" there. You know, when he was talking about these people who rejected the kind of the framework of impossibilities of the postmodern and wanted to go back to that kind of 1930s, you know, Marxist or kind of Heideggerian idea that anything is possible. I mean, I think that is a very admirable thing to kind of want to say, you know, remember what we once set out to do. Why don't we, you know, keep our sights set on what we might actually achieve, rather than just saying, well, nothing's really that possible anymore. I mean, okay, yeah, maybe those guys are LARPing, you know, with their drums and their armbands and their kind of, you know, edgy flags. But I think what the substance of what someone like Limonov was getting at, I mean, how at this point can we disagree with it? You know,
he was trying to capture Chud energy. I mean, it's what he called Russian maximalism, the idea of taking things to the extreme.
If I was Curtis, my voiceover would be something like, you know, it'd be like, in 2026, members of the online right, radicalized by, you know, Elon Musk or whatever, told themselves that you could just do things. But this was a fantasy. Turned out you could not just do things. And the overarching systems of power and the deep security state basically made it impossible. That's what I would say. I mean, is that not just the case? I mean,
and that's what happens with Limonov. Essentially, Surkov's brand of rebellion, the sort of dialectic of rebellion, takes over, and he's kind of sort of left standing in the dust.
I would still apply a slight backstop defense to that. I can't really disagree, but I think that the difference between Limonov in 1992 and the average like online MAGA so-and-so in 2026 is that Limonov was acting in good faith, whereas the online right is entirely fake, as you say. I think that's the main difference. Okay, maybe, yeah, they'll still face the same ultimate downfall, but it does make a difference if one is beginning with honest intentions and one isn't.
Прожорливых католиков, покинутых окопов и горящих муравейников. Вечная весна в одиночной камере. Вечная весна в одиночной камере. Под затопленными толпами, домами, площадями, многолюдными.
Tell you what, 90s Nazbol hip hop goes pretty, or whatever music this is, it goes quite hard. It's quite.
This is Yegor Letov. It's a Veshnaya Vesna, Eternal Spring. It's called.
It's better than the MAGA anthem that I played yesterday.
I was going to say, I'd rather listen to this than, you know, Hispanic MAGA rap. So.
Nazbol indie.
Дынями зловонными, церквями раскаленными, хуями и голодными влагалищами. Вечная весна в одиночной камере. Вечная весна в одиночной камере. Сквозь зеркальные убежища, словарные запасы, богохульные мыслишки и
Oh my god. Could we pause? That is the most ghoulish thing I have ever seen. Brains of gifted communists on the show. What?
Yeah, it's a place called Room 19 in what's called the Institute of Brain in Moscow. That I think they said Stalin set it up, but essentially, I've been looking. There was actually a program that 60 Minutes, the American current affairs program, did in 1991 called Room 19, where they went in and they took all the kind of the brains of the gifted communists. I mean, apparently Lenin's brain was taken, and it was it said it was cut into 30,000 separate splices for analysis under the microscope, and they sort of determined all of these kind of various conclusions about why Lenin was this genius. He had these particular anomalous brain formations and patterns that were seen on examination. So there you go.
Yeah, I will apologize. Obviously, the genre of that song we were listening to, as somebody pointed out, it's closer to like like a Russian Nick Cave or something like that. What do you call it? A Russian Gothic? What's it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's very Scott Walker, like late Scott Walker. I
Yeah.
mean, he used to write songs about Mussolini. You know. So.
Yeah.
Ghosts from the past were returning at the margins in England too. In August 1999, a farmer in Norfolk called Tony Martin shot 2 burglars who were travellers. He killed one of them, called Fred Barras. Tony Martin was a recluse. He lived in a remote, half-ruined building called Bleak House.
Tony Martin considered himself a victim. He'd been plagued by burglars for years. He lived in squalid conditions, paranoid about being burgled. The stairs of the house were booby-trapped. He slept fully dressed with his boots on and a gun by his bed.
Martin was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment.
I hate to get all woo-woo and esoteric here, Simon, right? But they do say that what you focus on your greatest fear is the thing that actually ends up happening. This guy like dedicated his whole house to not getting burgled, and he kept on being burgled.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, I'm not sure how much I trust Curtis here. He's leaning very heavily on that BBC News report, which, let's face it, is probably wrong. I mean, I'm sorry, but I doubt that. I don't fully believe it. I'm sure there was more to it than that.
Why would you have such a squalid house and then call it Bleak House?
And also, what are they going to go in there to burgle? You know, I don't doubt the guy was off his rocker a bit, but you know, I mean, travelers tried to break in. I mean, it's just the correct thing to do is to shoot them. Come on, come on, Adam.
His conviction touched off a wave of protest. On the surface, it was about Martin's right to defend himself. But it also expressed a much wider feeling that was simmering under the surface. That the very institutions that were supposed to protect the people, the law, the police, and the politicians, were now being turned against them. A growing sense that you couldn't trust those in power any longer. What began to be called the elites. The Labour government was shocked by the anger that burst out. Tony Blair wrote in a private memo simply, "We have lost touch." But what Blair and the other modern politicians had forgotten was that suspicion of the elites did not come out of nowhere. It had its roots back in Britain's past, at the moment when the empire was collapsing. And Tony Martin himself was a direct link back to that anger. In the 1950s, Martin's uncle had been a leading member of a group called the League of Empire Loyalists.
Very interesting. And of interest to this channel because, of course, Major General Richard Hilton was part of this group, along with several other prominent rightist voices that we have had some hand in kind of getting back out there, getting republished and so on. So.
Founded by A.K. Chesterton, cousin once removed of G.K.
Yes, right. He's got a very interesting book on our relationship with the Americans called The New Unhappy Lords, which I recommend people check out. The New Unhappy Lords. Yeah.
The League were powerful because some of their members were at the heart of the Conservative Party. They were convinced that there was a global conspiracy to destroy the British Empire.
And they were correct about that, weren't they?
They were not
It was a local conspiracy.
Yeah.
There's a great bit of footage here of a girl who is sort of acting as a bit of a spokesman, which is going to come up, which just enjoy it.
Can I just say, before we see these guys, can you imagine how base that room was? Unfiltered, like 1950s style, kind of old-fashioned Empire loyalist.
You know what really makes me jealous of this lot is that you can go to lots of places today and hear sort of based young men tell you all their right-wing opinions, but that room is shorn of irony. That room is shorn of performatism. that room is shorn of any kind of project. You know, it's just going to be real. What the people in that room say. I mean, look at the physiognomies in that room. You can see it.
And unfortunately, though, they lost.
Well,
and they lost because mainly, according to Major General Richard Hilton, they were betrayed by none other than Winston Churchill and the Tories yet again.
They were because the elite simply wasn't prepared to dig its heels in and, you know, defend its own interests in any reasonable way.
It was being run by bankers in America, working together with communists in Russia.
Oh my God! So that I mean, that should basically be the flag of this channel, shouldn't it?
This is true.
If it hadn't been for those pesky commies,
how can this be disputed at this point? Now, after we've seen all of history play out, now it's basically what happened.
The only correction I would make is that you'd have to add, you know, USA, the USSR, and the British elite are Britain's enemies, basically. Because you know,
also brackets from the point of view of Russia, Stalin was all right, but only if you're Russian, not if you're British.
Might be a bit crowded on there.
So it's good. It's starting to turn into a leftist meme, you know. Like
it's not quite as catchy, is it?
But they also believed that many of those in charge in Britain were also involved in this conspiracy, including most politicians.
I'm gonna have to screen grab that. It's too perfect.
That's too good.
I have to screen grab it and immediately tweet it out.
Can I ask a question, AA? Something that's been puzzling me a bit.
Yeah.
I think you might know about this. Is specifically Macmillan.
Yes.
Who was the most vociferous open dismantler of empire during that period.
Yes.
What I don't quite understand is that, like, I can sympathize with the idea that the empire simply wasn't tenable in the sense that we didn't have the money or the guns to actually keep it as it was.
Mm-hmm.
But someone like Macmillan went on to try and actively punish all the various Anglo and other descended groups in the empire. I mean, he went to Africa and basically kept trying to beat the Afrikaners in South Africa and the Rhodesians and the Kenyan elites. I mean, he was actively trying to like punish them for just existing there. That's what But where does that impulse come from in a man like Macmillan, who is otherwise, conservative?
They were resisting the winds of change, however he framed it.
Was it not the Macmillan cabinet that formulated the notion of managed decline?
I think so.
It was like an active doctrine, wasn't it? Wasn't it the winds of change speech?
Well, it was.
Template. Yeah.
And also, but I mean, a bit of extra deception on that is that he arrived in Cape Town to meet Hendrik Verwoerd, who was the premier of South Africa at that time, when South Africa was still under the crown at this point. And diplomatic protocol is that the leaders will swap speeches they're about to give, so that they basically know what the other one's going to say and make sure they're not repeating points or saying anything contradictory. Macmillan caused a huge diplomatic incident because he refused to give a copy of his speech to the South Africans, because, of course, it was basically saying, you all need to bugger off and let the blacks in. Just. I mean, for a man who traded on his reputation as a gentleman, that's pretty underhanded, isn't it? Surprising them with that.
What I find astonishing is that you'll still get Tories who will proudly say, I mean, I saw a Tory or Conservative Party aligned commentator the other day say on a program, well, I am a declinist. Proudly. I can't really remember who. I sort of can remember who it was, but I don't want to say it and put them in a invidious light. But I think it's a commonly held submerged belief for many of them that you just simply accept the fact and kind of do what you can to heap more misery on us to accelerate the process.
It's to such a hideous extent, because you have to remember that that right as Macmillan was giving that speech in Cape Town, the Belgians had fled the Congo, and there was a resultant ethnic cleansing and a genocide of all Belgians in that country, and not just Belgians, just any whites were just hunted down and killed, and the whole country descended into anarchy. And Macmillan just seriously expected the South Africans to say, "Yeah, okay, fine, we'll just surrender to that." And you have to remember, I mean, a lot of the focus is on the Afrikaner elite. An enormous amount, I think, arguably, at some parts a majority of the South African whites were just ethnic Brits that had moved there, you know, from kind of 1890 onwards. It was, I mean, you know, and he was just saying, you know, that's it. You're, you know, I'm going to actively punish you into forcing this to happen. I mean, it would be one thing if Britain had simply just withdrawn and gone, right, that's it. You know, we're going to just withdraw, you know, your kind of status under the crown and just let you go independent. But it's this active punishment of the elites of those countries that I don't understand at all.
Yeah, that requires a bit of further study. I mean, what's his name? Richard Hilton touches on it all in Imperial Obituary, but we don't really get a lot because of the way he writes and the way he is. We get a kind of overview. We don't get like the personal convictions of Macmillan and stuff like that because it's just not the sort of writer he is. But I'd be interested to know from his own point of view what he was thinking, you know?
Yeah.
I will say League of Empire loyalists were pretty energetic activists as well, doing a lot of gate-crashing Tory conferences and shouting Tory traitors. Apparently in one stunt, they somebody dressed up as Archbishop Makarios and went to a kind of UN event and shouted sort of slogans.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as interesting as these guys are, there is a tinge of the much mocked Colonel Blimp character about these chaps. I mean, I'm always reminded, have you seen or read Look Back in Anger by John Osborne?
Yeah.
You know, that was written in 1956, and he's a very angry young man, you know, a very angry young man. And his like uncle or his father-in-law, I think it is one of these sorts of guys. Like he's an old Edwardian, you know, military man, you know, and it's like he's arrived from 1932 and he's still running the Raj in his own head type thing. So he hasn't readjusted to like Britain's declined. Like he hasn't accepted the reality that Britain is a much diminished power now. Right. So there is I mean, if you're going to be very even-handed, you could say that, you know, somebody like Richard Hilton, you know, his thinking is very, I guess you'd say, lionish, right? Yeah. It's like every nail, he's got a hammer, right? And he sees that as the solution to everything, you know. So he's always moaning about, you know, scuttle and things like this, you know. Like so, his solution in Kenya, for example, is just like, well, you know, what did we do in 1846? We just shot them all. Why can't we do that now? Type thing.
Well, this is the confusing thing, is that they actually did in that Britain won all these very, very concise military victories very late in the day in the 50s and early 60s in places like Malaya and in Kenya, and then just gave up after having done that, which is the odd thing. I mean, I do agree with you in that the League of Empire loyalists in the 60s are a bit late in the day. In that the simple fact is that the money and the guns weren't there to keep the empire as what it was. What I don't understand is the punitive measures. I would understand if Britain looked at its colonies in, say, Africa and went, right, sorry, but you're on your own. That would have been one thing, but it was actively punishing the British people for being in those places that I find so unpalatable. You know, but I mean, as I say, even quite late in the day, we were still defeating insurgencies militarily. We defeated the Mau Mau, and we defeated the Malayan emergency. So,
but they also believed that many.
But I guess the hidden reason is simply just America said no. Let's face it. I mean, it's the Suez Crisis.
I mean, but you know, the really sad thing is that I think that by the 60s, America wasn't really that interested in the British Empire anymore. I think it was purely a case that our elites just didn't have the stomach. That they were too scared about headlines coming in from places like Malaysia to want to carry on. It was easier to just surrender and just cut your losses and go home.
One of the ideas that I've seen, and this is advanced by Marxist writer James Hartfield, who I've cited before, is that a decision was made to simply dissolve the empire into a shadow empire, which becomes the human rights regime that we live under today. or what you might call globalism writ large, where, okay, the empire is not there, but Britain stands as a guarantor of the international standards, the setter of the rules, the kind of legitimator of the rules-based international order, something like this.
We're moving to moral imperialism.
It's a kind of the shadow, and this I think is possibly coming to an end now in itself because of the machinations of the Israelis and the Americans. Now we've had enough of these kind of fictions that were set up in the death of the British Empire, because I mean, and that's one of the reasons why our elites are so globalist, is because the globalist system, in a weird way, was where the British Empire went. But you've got to remember, it's not a British. When it dissolves, even though it's the remnant of the British Empire, it is no longer quote unquote British. By which I mean, these global elites literally couldn't give a shit about this country.
No,
they are operating on a kind of higher plane in their mind.
Well, I mean, look at the lengths we went to enforce this moral empire. I mean, you have to remember, in 1980, as late as 1980, Britain militarily re-annexed Rhodesia just to give it to Mugabe. We actually went in there and took over a colony in 1980 to make sure that it went to Mugabe. That sums up to me the whole problem you're talking about with this bizarre kind of moral standard that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. We're willing to do whatever it takes as long as it's to enforce, things antithetical to our own interests.
You see, the thing is that somebody's saying globalism was an American project. That's true, but I think that there's an element of, how can I put it? Like, do you remember in that Disney version of Robin Hood, right? There's Prince John, who's a lion, who's always crying and sucking his thumb and so on. And then there's the slithery Sir Hiss,
Terry Thomas,
who's Terry Thomas, who's sneaking around. And in a way, Britain became like this Sir Hiss character. And you get the impression in that film that even though King John is the king, Sir Hiss is going to get away with what he can get away with. And any sneaky little bits of power he can find in the margins type thing. I'm pretty sure that is basically the strategy that the British elite were trying for a while. See what they could get away with, under the nose of Uncle Sam. It's kind of subversive in a way, but I'm pretty sure that's what they were up to for a while there. I could be wrong, but and then it took a major blow basically with Thatcher, who went all in with the Americans, I would say. But even she maintained a bit of it with Falklands and a few other little bits here and there. But I reckon after Thatcher that that became Americanized as well somehow, or the independence of that, whatever that was, became co-opted by them again, if that makes any sense.
Of those in charge in Britain were also involved in this conspiracy, including most politicians.
Well, my reasons for joining the Empire Loyalists are many, but they largely stem from the fact that I believe in the thesis of nationalism, national independence.
No, I've met this girl.
Before Emilia, there was.
You don't hear people talking like that anymore. Really, really, really trying to do the RP there. National independence. You don't hear that.
That's great.
Nationalism, which I consider would in time devolve into a world government, which would of necessity, by sheer weight of numbers, become a communist-controlled world government, with the control of the world vested in the hands of very few people. This would be a tyranny, and I consider the only way to combat this possibility of a tyranny is to encourage a nation for nationality.
And that anger was about to return.
I think I'm in love.
By now, politicians in the West had given large amounts of their power away. What had begun with Bill Clinton...
Can I just say, though, did the League of Empire and Loyalists really see this narrative in the British national consciousness? No. I mean, is this really what Curtis is saying? I don't really believe that anger in 1999 was prefigured by, this kind of marginal group in the 1960s. or do you think we're underestimating them, Simon?
I think. Sorry.
Go on. You go on, Hart, first. You go. Hart.
Well, I think what Curtis is doing is he's saying that there's a kind of a link in the consciousness between kind of your average kind of ruddy-faced Brit who shoots a traveler because he's invading his property, and the mindset of these young Empire loyalists in the early 1960s. It's the kind of it's so kind of diminished. I hate to use this as an example, but imagine like the average Brit that watches Clarkson's Farm nowadays, like that. It's that mindset versus the mindset of someone like Mandelson or Blair or Starmer, who's on another planet in terms of the values and the things that they see. I think it's that kind of divide is what Curtis
it's your GB News watcher.
Probably. Sorry, Simon.
No, not at all. I think that's it, really. I mean, going back to the beginning of the series, Blair is just following the sort of logic of funneling the instinct for, national or nationalist representation, the violence inherent in that, into these systems of bureaucratic managerialism, as we all know.
In the early 1990s had spread. When Tony Blair came to power, he had immediately given control over much of the economy to the Bank of England. But in 1998, the global financial system showed how unstable it could be. An economic crisis that began in Russia and then spread to Asia had consequences throughout the world. In response to the crisis, the Bank of England had insisted that interest rates be raised. But this made many British goods too expensive to export. And in the north of England, factories began to close. Tony Blair insisted, though, that it was a price the country had to pay for being part of what he called the world economy.
You can say world economy till he's blue in the face. But it's not just us, is it? It's other people.
He can say, Mr. Blair can say world economy.
It's world economy. You can say world economy, but...
So what do you say?
People in the North East are suffering. But why is he giving all that power to the Bank of England? Why? Well, why is that? Is he passing the buck? What's he doing? So he can't be blamed for things like this that go wrong. You can say, oh, well, it's the Bank of England's interest rates and all the rest of it. I don't know.
Now, if Blair was in the room, he'd say, I'm sorry. I mean, he would get in his combat mode, and then he'd go round that kitchen and point out where the goods had come from, where they'd been made, and point to the global supply chain that informs every aspect of your life. I'm sure that's some form of the answer that he'd give.
Saying Blair was a Friedmanite.
No, I think he genuinely believed in some form of like managed market logic, that we are inextricably linked to this is just the reality of now, and there's nothing really we can do about it. So he kind of had to follow what the Bank of England would have said, because this is a global problem, and the reason that your prices are going up is because every country is affected in the short term. And madam, he'd say, have a look at the record from 1997 to now, and you've actually seen that, judged in the longue durée, your actual prices of goods have gone down, and GDP per capita has never been higher.
House prices went up 211% under the Blair regime. He'd bite his tongue to keep himself from saying, "You've never had it so good."
Yeah.
Things did get better. Okay, we've had a blip, but you've got to see the big picture here. Take your mind back to the closing job centres under Job Major. Have I seen enough Blair? I can just predict what he was going to say at this point.
It does sound. I mean, I'm starting to understand all those leftists that say, "Well, Blair was just a continuation of Thatcher." That it's just, look, it's okay as long as we surrender to the money power. It's fine.
Basically, yeah. Clause 4.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And still, even my impression of Blair is better than any Labour frontbencher right now. Morgan McSween, any Starmer's messaging is so inept and so bad. It's like, I mean, I know people keep on saying it, genuinely this week we could be seeing the start of the end of Starmer, because I just don't know how. I don't know, like they've managed it so badly.
It's funny. I mean, in the space of a week, because I mean, last week you were saying you look stronger than ever.
Yeah, but I mean, the handling of this, when he said, he basically said, oh, well, he showed poor judgment and mistakes were made. I mean, you can't poor judgment and mistakes were made over this. You have to be like, yeah, we're going to throw the fucking bucket in. Right? Yeah. I mean, even Gordon Brown had better political instincts to be like furious when there needs to be a police investigation. But Starmer did not do that. He didn't say those things. So he had to say them.
I don't know, because I think a lot of the media are basically doing Starmer's game, in that he's badly defending himself, but the media are doing it for him, in that they're focusing entirely on it being Mandelson and Andrew. They're not. I don't think there's enough of a. I don't think the system has turned against them enough for him to go over this yet.
They're sharpening their knives. If you heard LBC this morning, Simon, they're sharpening their knives, or at least the Tory party are. Anyway,
I don't know.
The red. Don't forget, Starmer's got enemies within the party now, like the Red Queen looking for revenge. So we could see for the first time ever, Labour do in their own, because it very seldom happens, but they could do him in. Let's see.
Maybe.
They're just opening their mouths and letting the wind waffle their tongues about, as far as I'm concerned. Get up here and get things sorted. You vote a Labour government in, you vote for them all your life, and this is the crap you get off them.
You think it's all wrong what's happened? What could they have done?
Give us more support, stepped in, put a shoulder behind us, show a bit more muscle. Just let them know that they cannot do this.
And at the end of the century...
The thing is, AA, as Bowden said, and as you've pointed out, every single one of these people, come the next election, voted Labour again.
Yeah,
they all did, because they're not going to vote Tory, are they? Or,
to be fair, lots of these people stayed at home, and Blair said, "Well, that shows they were content because there was a low turnout for that election, but he still won. He did the calculus that he still won." Yeah, and there was a huge push around this time. This is an untold story of Muslim voters switching from Labour to Tory for some reason
around this time,
over Iraq and over Afghanistan. That didn't really. There was a lot of media hype around it, but it didn't really materialise.
But
they didn't turn out for Tories. So.
Weren't a lot of Tories actually quite big on the Iraq War? Like they were pretty in favour of it because it was sort of like a rah Britain moment.
Yeah, but they still. I mean, Blair still had to own it, so it was used as a cudgel, as a political. And there was a genuine bid by the Tory party to win over Muslim voters, and it would have been Michael Howard, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, they never got Muslims, but they eventually got the Hindus and the Sikhs.
Yeah.
So there's that.
And they were thinking along those lines at that point. Using foreign policy as a kind of, oh, look what happens when you vote for the Tories, for Labour, etc.
Yeah.
A new anger began to grow out in the margins of England that in the future would get mixed up with the furies of the past. But the politicians increasingly found that there was little they could do to respond to this anger. Because over the past 10 years, all kinds of new organisations had grown up that were deliberately designed to limit the politicians' power. Because national politics was dangerous to the stability of the global system. The idea had originally come from technocrats inside the European Union. One of the leaders was a political scientist called Giandomenico Maione. Politicians, Maione said, were always driven by short-term, self-interested motives, which meant that they too were irrational. The solution, he said, was to bypass the politicians completely.
Vous avez des problèmes avec le pacte de stabilité? Pardon? Avez-vous des problèmes avec le pacte de stabilité? Pas tellement.
And in the 1990s, behind the scenes of the political debate in the European Union, Maione and a group of technocrats created a range of new institutions that were deliberately designed to avoid political interference and instead run large areas of society in a rational way. Maione gave them a boring bureaucratic name. He called them non-majoritarian institutions.
Amazing. Absolutely so blatant.
But in reality, they were a completely radical invention that challenged the very idea of democracy. These new organisations, Maione said, are by design not directly accountable to voters or to their elected representatives. Out of it was going to come the massive range of new bureaucracies that today run large parts of the modern world. Not just central banks, but all kinds of regulatory agencies, special courts and expert bodies, all of which govern not through political policies, but through rational, scientific assessment and measured outcomes. And the European Union became the centre of this experiment. In front of house, the elected politicians debated subjects like human rights, but continually failed to come to any conclusion.
It's exactly like the, do you remember I did that whole video on the Soviet Union power structure and the presidium of the, whatever it was, the
Supreme Soviet.
The Supreme Soviet, and, you know, and basically it's just Stalin making decisions, you know, behind the, like the whole, like they used to meet up and have like days of debates, of voting on stuff that just didn't matter because the Politburo decides ultimately. So,
and you can understand why there was an uptick in geopolitical terrorism around this time. It's because what other response do you have if you go into the system, it's explicitly designed to stop you from doing anything. I mean, it's basically inviting a kind of, you know, stereotypical bomb-throwing terrorist, isn't it? Because how else are you going to clear these things out? You know, makes sense.
Well, I would say their mistake is not to formally declare that democracy is over.
Yeah.
They could have done that, and then there wouldn't be the expectation.
I guess it's the perfect form of containment, though, isn't it? Because everyone genuinely believes they can, you know, if they could form a party and stand for parliament and go and change things, you know.
Dobbiamo apprestare una serie di garanzie, una serie di protezione per I cittadini.
Are we concerned with rights or with political objectives? And much of what we're going to discuss today is...
Personnellement, je pense que les femmes méritent d'avoir 2 articles dans la charte et pas un seul.
But quietly, behind the scenes, what were being created were, in Maione's words, specialised institutions staffed with neutral experts, carrying out policies with a level of efficiency and effectiveness politicians cannot and never will achieve.
You can see why Blair loved the EU, can't you?
And the next step was to privatise it in the form of his own institute.
It's his dream. It's his absolute dream.
Well, it's the negation of politics, isn't it? It's just saying the answer is there are no politics. There's just management. You're just going to be managed. Very dark.
The original idea behind mass democracy had been that the politicians would be the bridgehead for the people into power. They would challenge the powerful groups at the top of society on behalf of the people.
My, how we laughed.
Oh, Lord.
But then the people, driven by the new individualism, had retreated into their own private worlds. So the politicians switched sides and became instead the representatives of the new powerful technocratic class. It still looked like they were powerful and had control over events. But now the people had gone. Beneath them was a void. But in 1999,
you know, it could have worked had they not done the mass immigration.
I often think that. It's sort of like they'd almost achieved Fukuyama world, didn't they? Where they got rid of every major problem, and then they created one by bringing in millions of foreigners. Although, to be fair, I mean, if you look into it, basically that was a technocratic institutions doing their job. They said, "Oh no, there's going to be a huge economic crash, and the pensions are going to run out of money unless we bring in millions of Algerians or whatever." So, in a sense, that was the system doing its job, wasn't it? It was rationally correcting in a non-political way, and then they tried to pretend for 20 years that immigration wasn't a political issue.
Tony Blair realised that there might still be a way to change the world dramatically and recapture some of that power. The conflict between the Serbs and the Muslims in the Balkans had erupted again. Serbian nationalists were attacking the Albanian population in Kosovo. Blair worked hard to persuade a reluctant President Clinton to join in a bombing campaign, to force the Serbs to stop the ethnic cleansing.
Now, Curtis is kind of talking this up with Blair's high ideals. I'm not convinced that Blair has ever seen a place on a map that he doesn't want to bomb immediately, because it seems like he wants to go into Zimbabwe and places like that.
To be fair, though, I agree with that. I'm actually very put out that, you know, the Americans got us in all these neocon adventures in the 2000s and refused to let Blair go into Zimbabwe, because a British-led invasion of Zimbabwe to remove Mugabe would have been incredible. I mean, we could have. I mean, because again, it's just mask off. I don't like this regime, but I like it when the mask comes off, because it's at least then you know what you're dealing with. That would have been a genuinely statesman-like move, I think, to just invade Zimbabwe while we still had the military power to do so.
Can you just imagine, you know, guys? I mean, like, don't think of it as like the old Rhodesia. Think of it as New Desia.
Can you imagine? It's like, you know, who would it have been? Probably Mandelson or something gets made High Commissioner of Blairite Zimbabwe.
He gets a huge white pith helmet with an enormous ostrich feather and a golden throne.
Well, it would have been. I've still got the idea that, you know, when the new Gaza comes in under the premiership of you know, High Lord Viceroy Blair, and they'd be like, right, step 1, shore start. Step 2, we need to. What were the other things they did? We'll bring in ASBOs for the Gazans. Step 3, digital ID. You know, I mean, because that's basically what he did. Just do the same thing again, wouldn't he? Just do the same, all his old. You know, standing up there in front of the black market in Zimbabwe, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, education. Just bring all the old slogans back.
It'd just be an entire African country run on the lines of Brixton Council. It'd be amazing.
And it succeeded. Tony Blair came to Kosovo and was welcomed as a hero. At the refugee camp, Blair presented what they had done as an expression of that epic vision that Bernard Kouchner had put forward 20 years before. We are all one world, linked together simply as individuals, not divided by political ideas or by nations. And we, the good politicians in the West, have a duty to intervene, to help the victims of all evil dictators, wherever they are in the world.
This is not a battle for territory. This is a battle for humanity. It is a just cause. It is a rightful cause to make sure that these people, innocent people, who have been driven from their homes at the point of a gun, are allowed by the world community, acting together, back to their homeland, back to Kosovo, so these people can become symbols of hope, humanity, and peace. Thank you.
And the new ruler of the independent Kosovo, appointed by the United Nations, was Bernard Kouchner.
We were taking significant step towards stability and democratic self-government in Kosovo.
In the 1990s, the triumph over communism had ushered in a new era. Liberal politicians in the West had willingly given up much of their power in the interests of the greater good, of global stability. The power had gone first to the global financial system, and now it was being given to the American military as well. It looked like a new world. But underneath, the old forces of money and military power were reassembling and resuming their dominance, just as they had in the pre-democratic days of the old empires. And that was going to lead to other strange forces rising up and coming back to haunt the West.
But for a brief moment, Blair achieved the absolute dream, Fukuyama world. It lasted for about 6 months in 1999, but he did achieve the dream. It's all been downhill from there. There we go. Maybe in years to come, people will look back on exactly that moment when he gave that speech as the absolute apex of that kind of post-Cold War order.
And also, you can see why he was so popular among, like, you know, sort of Shepherd's Bush, Holland Park lovies, can't you? Because he did have something of a maverick about him. You know, with his kind of sleeves rolled up and no tie, stood in Kosovo like a kind of conquering statesman, going, you know, this is not about territory. I mean, John Major would never have done that. Ian Duncan Smith would never have done that. You know?
Couldn't have pulled it off.
No, they wouldn't have been able to do it. Whereas Tone, as you know, you say, could do it. Also, just to ask, so these Curtis docs, are we watching them in chronological order as the series has gone on?
Yes.
Because this would be a perfect start point for the Nightmares one, wouldn't it? With Saeed Qutb and the because that's kind of it kind of leads into it, doesn't it? It's like, you know, as the because that's the traditional view that sort of 9/11 ended Fukuyama world, didn't it? It kind of loops around itself.
I think this episode has been one of the better Curtos in a while, Simon. This is a particularly good one, I thought.
It definitely sets us up for a lot. I mean, I haven't watched the series since it originally came out, so I haven't watched the last 2 episodes yet, and I'm going to go back to them and see. But yeah, as Panama says, it's this moment where, you know, the sense of the Potemkin democracy is beginning to collapse. These ancient, Freudian forces of, violence are rushing in, and, we're trying to sort of chart a way forward. So, I mean, yeah, it does in a sense loop with Power of Nightmares, and, his other series have kind of left that open as well. And where it goes from here, God knows.
Well, let's watch the final bit. So there are a couple of super chats, and then we're going to get out of here. That's Todd Lewis before a recording session with me.
Heavy-handed point about China. Yeah.
Thank you.
AA there.
Wow, what a sequence that was!
I think in terms of pure filmmaking, that was the best Curtis I've ever seen. Just as an ending to that was beautiful.
Yeah, the amazing thing is that everybody you saw in there follows me on Twitter now, including
the ISIS people,
the woman who Blair himself, the woman who kissed the Stalin, the German guy calling the.
Play out music for that was "You Are the Generation That Bought More Shoes and You Get What You Deserve" by Johnny Boy.
Brilliant title. Could I just just to ask, I meant to say it earlier, that sequence where it was sort of Scousers complaining about Blair and kind of shots of English discontent. Question for you both: do you think Adam Curtis knows who Jonathan Bowden was? Do you think he's ever come across a Bowden tape in the wild, in his kind of deep researches into British discontent in that era?
On the evidence of published interviews and things, no. But also he does allude at times to knowing what's going on the right. He kind of does watch, but he doesn't acknowledge anything.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he'd be that deep in, but he's aware of ethno-nationalist resurgence on the right in the last 10, 15 years. And he obviously he instinctively as a kind of liberally minded person tries to sort of ground the idea that well, we obviously don't want to go there, the tragedy of the 20th century, these things explode into violence, but how do we reforge collectivity in a way that everybody can embrace? So he's got I guess the received opinion in that sense, but he's not alluded to it. It would be interesting to find out what he does think about it. I mean, that would be an ultimate sort of question to say, what can you address the right's ideas on their own terms?
There are a couple of there's a couple of super chats here. Piotr says Czech nationalism 1918 sanctioned by the US, 1948 sanctioned by the USSR, 2026 sanctioned by Israel. Often patriots act as the loudest salesman for whichever patron they have latched onto. Coney says, someone once said that Myers-Briggs personality types are astrology signs for Redditors.
Correct.
AJ said, I will say the CIA and various other organizations do use those, big corporations use those tests, which is...
That makes it correct, does it? The CIA and big corporations doing it.
Are Redditors.
Yeah, come on.
AJ says, very thought-provoking. I have been on a political journey since Brexit, but I feel like Colonel Nicholson, in light of these horrific revelations. What have I done? I want nothing to do with the right as it has become. Chris, I'm sure many people feel that at this moment. Chris Primer says, nonsense. Being Welsh means you're chronically in debt and never pay. Treasure the honour of Welshing, especially gambling. I consider that a slur on the level of Anne Robinson. Dan 111 says, not only is Serbian nationalism a contrast to Russia, etc., it is the apex symbol of the ostensible end of empire, having kicked off the Great War. No, I'm not grim from Red Hood says, I think one of the things I've come to terms with since 2025 is that nobody is coming to save us. We and the West at large must do everything ourselves. Chris Primer says, who does not love Fournier gangrene? Laws of Kyrgyz says, it is my belief we have a primary and secondary when we are born, and that this has been used by capital for extensive surgeries and social degradation. No, I'm not grim from Red Hood says, you would tank your image overnight doing that. Oh, he means the Russian bodyguards, yeah.
I mean, it would be a hell of a photo, but as I say, I think it would cheapen things a bit.
Fletcher says rationalism is a disease. To reject instinct as bias ends in madness because you'll never have enough data to make purely rational decisions.
Correct.
Cringewalker says T-1000 dragging down the Starminator while it's still reforming, pulling them both into the files of history, restarting. It really would be poetic. And then the final little thumb of Starmer as he goes down into the lava would be quite amazing.
Well,
go on up.
Well, just because if something I've just occurred to me, I've not really thought about because I don't see any credibility to the idea of Starmer going. But if he did, I mean, do you seriously see like a Rayner administration? I mean, is that wouldn't I'm thinking should be more of a sort of left-wing Liz Truss type than anything else. Just not serious figures.
It'd probably be that Wes Streeting or somebody like that, I'd imagine.
Right.
But,
yeah. Maybe.
Over Vivid says, I have finished applied elite theory, and with the knowledge I have now, I see COVID-19 as the declaration of power from the NGO elites and new government. Well, I think that was starting to happen, but I also have a theory that whatever was starting to be formed there was halted in its tracks by the Zios.
Yeah.
And by the military state, if that makes any sense, because of the rapidity with which it receded after the Ukraine war started.
Yes. Well, I mean, Klaus Schwab himself is out in the cold. He has been since the end of COVID. Apparently, there's a big split there because all the elites have stopped going to all his events and they don't sort of respond to his calls anymore because they see him as responsible for blowing a lot of cover during COVID by openly coming out and going, you live into pod, eats the bugs. Apparently, they're not happy with him over that. So,
bad PR. Anyway, folks, I have to go and record one of those interviews now, and I'm 3 minutes late, my guests. But thank you very much, Hat. You're always welcome, even after Horus comes back. I think you've been a welcome addition to these streams. So,
well, I would, you know where I am. So if the call is needed, I'll happily come back.
I think I could put it to vote, and then if they say no, I could ignore it and still ask.
Yeah, exactly, because democracy isn't real. Win-win. Yeah.
And thank you very much, Simon. I'll just remind people, pick up courses, check out Hass on YouTube, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Toodle pip.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Well, that's easily fixed.